Township Parsippany-Troy Hills regular council meeting, March 20th, 2012. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided in accordance with requirements of the Open Public Meeting Law by filing notice in the office of Township Clerk, posting the meeting notice on the bulletin board municipal building, December 15, 2011, where it's remained posted since that date. Legal notice appeared both Daily Record, Star Ledger, forwarded by fax to other newspapers, local radio stations, December 19, 2011. Note, council meetings are videotaped, aired Cablevision. Public access, Channel 21, 2 p.m. Sundays are available. Viewing www.parsippany.net. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi?
Here.
Mr. Cesaro?
Here.
Mr. DiPiero?
Here.
Mr. Ferrara?
Here.
Council President Stanton?
Here. Also present, Mayor Barbario, Jasmine Lynn, Business Administrator, John Inglesino, Township Attorney, Mary Solerso, Acting Deputy Clerk. Please rise for a flag salute. Mr. DiPiero.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Upcoming meetings, 4/3/2012, 7:30 p.m. Agenda meeting, public invited, public participation. 4/10/12, 7:30 p.m. Regular meeting, public invited, public participation. I also have the dates for our budget meetings. Do we have a copy up top too? Do we have? Okay. Budget meetings, first one, March 24th, 2012, 8:30 a.m. till 12:30. Tuesday, March 27, 2012, 7:30 p.m. till end. Saturday, March 31st, 10:30 a.m. till approximately 1 p.m. Okay, mayor's presentations, I have none. Anything? Discussions, none. Bids to be taken, 3/28/12, 11 a.m. Sealed proposals for Park Road resurfacing project, Phase 2, 4/3/12 at 12 p.m. Sealed proposals for Sylvan Way South Interceptor sewer replacement. Request for quotations, proposals, qualifications, none. Now, ordinances, second readings, and public hearings. Paul, 04.
Ordinance number 2012:04. The foregoing ordinance was published in its entirety in the Daily Record, the official newspaper of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills, on January 13, 2012. Be it resolved that an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending Section 285-4, Schedule A, No Parking Fire Zones of Article 1 of Chapter 285, Parking of the Code of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills to establish fire zones and regulate parking at 1140 and 1160 Parsippany Road, Block 410, Lot 22.01. Be read in its title only, on second reading, and a hearing held thereon.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Karifi, second by Mr. Cesaro. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi?
Yes.
Excuse me, are you taking a vote on the ordinance?
Do we do the roll call? Oh, I
No, you
open
need to
first?
open
Okay.
to the public.
Okay, at this time, I'll open this ordinance and this ordinance alone to the public.
But we used to do roll calls.
We used to do the roll call
We used to do the
first.
roll call first, and then,
Yes,
yeah.
and then we do it again at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, Mr. Karifi?
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro?
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero?
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara?
Yes.
Mr. Stanton?
Yes. Now open this ordinance to the public and only this ordinance. Seeing no one come forward, I'd like to close it. Mr. Karifi?
Whereas the above ordinance was read in title on second reading and a hearing held thereon, now therefore be it resolved that said ordinance be passed on final reading and that a notice of final passage of said ordinance be published in the newspaper according to law.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Karifi, second by Mr. Cesaro. Roll call.
Okay, Mr. Karifi?
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro?
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero?
Yes.
Mr. Farrar?
Yes.
Council President Stanton?
Yes. Mr. Cicero, 05.
March 20, 2012, ordinance number 2012:05. The foregoing ordinance was published in its entirety in the Daily Record, the official newspaper of Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, on January 13, 2012. Be it resolved that an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending Section 285-4, Schedule A, no parking fire zones of Article 1 of Chapter 285, parking of the Code of the Township Parsippany-Troy Hills to establish fire zones and regulate parking at 50 Parsippany Road, Block 392, Lot 4, be read in title only on second reading and a hearing held thereon.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Cicero, second by Mr. Farrar. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes. And now open this ordinance and this ordinance only to the public. See no one come forward. I'd like to close this ordinance. Mr. Cicero.
Thank you. Whereas the above ordinance was read in title on second reading and hearing held thereon, now therefore be it resolved that said ordinance be passed on final reading and that a notice of final passage of said ordinance be published in the newspaper according to law.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Well, do I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Cicero, second by Mr. Farrar. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes. March 20th, 2012, ordinance number 2012:06. Foregoing ordinance published in its entirety in the Daily Record, the official newspaper, Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, January 13, 2012. Be resolved, ordinance entitled Ordinance Amendment Section 285-4, Schedule A, No Parking Fire Zones, Article 1, Chapter 285, Parking of the Code of Township, Parsippany-Troy Hills to establish fire zones, regulate parking at 100 Kimball Drive, Block 735, Lot 1.06. Be read in title only, second reading, and hearing held thereon.
Second.
Motion by myself, second by Mr. Cicero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes, I now open this ordinance and this ordinance only to the public. Seeing no one come forward, I close this ordinance. Whereas the above ordinance was read in title, second reading, and hearing held thereon, now therefore be it resolved, said ordinance be passed on final reading, said notice, final passage, said ordinance be published in newspaper according to law.
Second.
Motion by myself, second by Mr. Cicero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes. Colon 07, Mr. Farrar.
Ordinance number 2012:07. The foregoing ordinance was published in its entirety in the Daily Record, the official newspaper of the Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, on January 13, 2012. Be it resolved that the ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending Section 285-4, Schedule A, no parking fire zone of Article 1 of Chapter 285, parking of the Code of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills, to establish fire zone and regulate parking at 1 Jefferson Road, Block 73502, Lot 4, be read in title only on second reading and hearing held thereon.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Farrar, second by Mr. Cicero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes, I now open this ordinance only, open to the public. See no one come further, come forward.
No one's seconding these. Does anyone see parking changes?
Oh, I know. Mr. Farrar?
Whereas the above ordinance was read in title on second reading and hearing held thereon, now therefore be it resolved that the said ordinance be passed on final reading and a notice of final passage of said ordinance be published in the newspaper according to law.
Second. I'm the only one that supports a parking zone.
Motion
changes.
by Mr. Farrar, second by Mr. Cicero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DePiero.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes. Colon 08, Mr. DePiero.
Ordinance 2012:08. The foregoing ordinance was published in its entirety in the Daily Record, the official newspaper of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills, on January 13, 2012. Be it resolved that an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending Section 285-4, Schedule A, no parking fire zones of Article 1 of Chapter 285, parking of the Code of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills to establish fire zones and regulate parking at 1560 Route 46, Block 719, Lot 1.2, be read in title only on second reading, and a hearing held thereon.
Second.
Second.
Motion by Mr. DiPiero, second by Mr. Ferrara. Roll call.
No,
Parking is important.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Yes.
Mr. Stanton.
Yes, I now open this ordinance to the public and this ordinance only. See no one come forward? Mr. DiPiero.
Whereas the above ordinance was read in title on second reading and the hearing held thereon, now therefore be it resolved that said ordinance be passed on final reading, and that a notice of final passage of said ordinance be published in the newspaper according to law.
Second.
Motion by Mr. DiPiero, second by Mr. Karifi. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes. Colon 09, Mr. Ferrara.
Ordinance number 2012:09. The foregoing ordinance was published in its entirety in the Daily Record, the official newspaper of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills, on January 13, 2012. Be it resolved that an ordinance entitled Refunding Bond Ordinance of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills in the County of Morris, New Jersey, providing for the refunding of the township's general obligation bonds originally issued in 2005, consisting of general improvement bonds, sewer utility bonds, and water utility bonds, and authorizing the issuance of not to exceed $18,630,000 general obligation refunding bonds consisting of not to exceed $17,550,000 general improvement refunding bonds, not to exceed $790,000 water utility refunding bonds, and not to exceed $290,000 sewer utilities refunding bonds for financing the cost thereof. Be read in title only on second reading and hearing held thereon.
Second.
Sec-
Motion by Mr. Ferrara, second by myself. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes, I now open this ordinance to the public and only this ordinance. See no one come forward? Mr. Ferrara.
Whereas the above ordinance was read in title on second reading and a hearing held thereon, now therefore be it resolved that the said ordinance be passed on final reading and that the notice of final passage of said ordinance be published in the newspaper according to law.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ferrara, second by Mr. Cicero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Yes.
Mr. Stanton.
Yes. Colon 10, Mr. Cicero.
March 20th, 2012, ordinance number 2012:10. The foregoing ordinance was published in its entirety in the Daily Record, the official newspaper of Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, on January 13, 2012. Be it resolved, an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending Chapter 51, Open Space Committee, to further revise the purposes for which the Open Space Trust Fund can be used, and authorizing the Township to dissolve the Open Space Trust Fund and create the Municipal Open Space, Recreation, Floodplain Protection, and Farmland and Historic Preservation Trust Fund, being read in title only on second reading and hearing held thereon.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Cicero, second by Mr. Ferrara. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes, I now open this motion to the public.
Do you want, Mr.
You will be
Mr.
given
Stanton?
3 minutes
Mr.
to
Stanton,
speak.
Do you want me to make a presentation?
You want to do that now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, before, Mr. Crabbe, before I open the,
No one cared
to the
about
public,
parking.
in discussing with the council president, thought that it might be wise that I give a little overview of what the ordinance is all about. So I'm going to do that. The general purpose of the ordinance is really to clarify and codify the township's laws with respect to open space. Although the need for the ordinance arose in connection with our review of the issue of whether open space trust fund monies could be used to pay debt service in connection with the turf fields project, this ordinance is not an ordinance that is geared solely for the turf fields project. In fact, it's our strong recommendation that this ordinance proceed irrespective of whether the turf fields project is supported or not supported. Now, in terms of the current open space documentation and program in Parsippany-Troy Hills, there's a few things that I wanted to explain. And we've received numerous emails, some letters. In fact, someone even sent us a copy of the NJAC handbook. Thank you very much. It's a good read. And so what I've tried to do in preparation for an explanatory outline here is to incorporate as many questions and comments that we've received as possible in a way that hopefully that makes sense and answers some questions. Now, as I say, in the beginning was 1988, which is when the residents of Parsippany-Troy Hills passed a referendum legally establishing an open space trust fund. That referendum was put on the ballot and approved pursuant to state law, which was 40:12-10 was the law at the time. That law has since been repealed. And what the question said was, and I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read it in pertinent part. Shall the Township Council, the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills, adopt an ordinance establishing an open space trust fund which will have the following provisions. Provision number 2, said funds shall be designated solely for the purchase of property within the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills for active and passive recreation. There are other provisions to the question, but none relate to purposes of the fund. That is the only provision that relates to the purpose of the fund. The sole purpose of the fund was to acquire property for active and passive recreation. There's been a lot of commentary on whether or not open space trust fund monies can be used for recreation. As lawyers, we deal in a world of shades of gray. On this issue, there is no gray. It is black and white. Clearly, open space trust fund monies can be used, should be used, and its sole purpose was to be used originally for the acquisition of property for active and passive recreation. That is not an issue upon which I think reasonable people can disagree when you look at the actual verbiage of the public question. In 1989, there was an ordinance that was set to codify the will of the voters and implement the trust fund. Now, while the ordinance doesn't contain the precise verbiage of the referendum, clearly the ordinance was intended to implement the referendum. And that is the only interpretation that can be given to the ordinance, because, again, the authority of the law for the law in the first instance comes from the legislature in 40:12-10, which has since been repealed, but was in effect at the time. Secondly, from the referendum, pursuant to the legislation, and third, from the ordinance. So the ordinance, the referendum, and the legislation have to be read in a manner that are consistent. There's no other way to read them. And by the way, the verbiage with regard to active and passive recreation is also contained in the statute that was applicable at that time. So from 1988 until 1997, that was the law with regard to open space trust funds in Parsippany-Troy Hills. In 1997, the New Jersey State Legislature enacted a law that was signed by then Governor Whitman that broadened the purposes for which open space trust fund money could be used. And that law is contained at 40:12-15.1 et sec. And the specific purposes are contained in 15.7, which is set forth in our memo of February 14th, which has been available on the township website. And those purposes are things such as historic preservation, specifically debt service for payments, for bond payments, farmland preservation, etc. All the purposes that were enumerated in that statute. Now, here's where I want to be clear. Any town under 15.8, any town that had already passed a referendum to create an open space trust fund under the old repealed law, 40:12-10, like Parsippany-Troy Hills, because Parsippany did this in 1988, could expand the purposes of its fund to include the purposes set forth in 15.7, debt service, historic preservation, farmland preservation, etc., by holding a public hearing and adopting an ordinance. And this public hearing is a public hearing on this ordinance and a public hearing in satisfaction of 15.8. Now, if you didn't pass a referendum back in 1988, then in order to avail yourselves of the purposes of 15.7, you had to go to the voters for a referendum to get approval. Parsippany didn't have to do that. In fact, there's no provision in the law for Parsippany to do that because Parsippany did it in 1988. And because of that, the way in which Parsippany avails itself of the broader purposes of the law was to pass an ordinance and hold a public hearing such as we are doing tonight. No need for a referendum, no requirement for a referendum. In fact, a referendum really has no legal purpose under the law, because Parsippany's mechanism, again, to avail itself of the broader purposes of the Open Space Trust Fund was to proceed by way of ordinance. There was no attempt by Parsippany to increase the amount of the tax levy, the 2 cents per 100. If you wanted to do that, that would have to go to referendum, but there was never an attempt to do that. Now things get a little confusing, so please bear with me. We then go to 2006. In 2006, there was a referendum. You just heard me say there was no need for a referendum. Why was there a referendum? I don't know.
I can
don't
answer
know.
that,
I don't know.
Counselor. There was a referendum because the legal advice we received at that point in time said we established an open space ordinance by referendum, and now if we wanted to change that referendum to conform to the state, we needed another referendum.
Okay.
That was our legal advice.
And I'm not aware of that. I didn't see a letter to that effect, but I don't agree with that. I don't think that's debatable, because clearly under 15.8, a referendum was not
That's the
required.
advice we got.
Counselor, that referendum in '06 was statewide, right?
No.
Okay.
No. No. And the referendum itself was a little bit confusing as well. The referendum provided essentially for two things. Number one, it was clear that the referendum sought to expand the use of the fund for improvements. And the other was it set percentage allocations for how the fund would be used, a certain percentage for capital improvements, historic preservation, and for acquisition. Again, none of this comes out of the statute at all. It was just in the referendum. And when you look at the verbiage in the referendum, it does not comport with the verbiage in the statute. So it is very confusing as to what was intended at that time when you just look at the law, the initial public referendum in 1988, and the 1997 statute. We have reviewed the minutes from the meeting and have also had discussions with some of the folks here who were there at that time, and it's our opinion, but admittedly, we are in a little bit of a gray area upon which reasonable people can agree or disagree. But it appears to us that the intent of the council at that time was to broaden the purposes of the fund to take advantage of all of the flexibility that the statute, the 1997 statute, provided. Again, that's our view, and some of the folks who were there at that time can certainly comment on that in a moment, but our view is that's what was intended. But whether that was intended or not, the point is that the way to expand the usage of the Open Space Trust Fund was not by referendum, it was by ordinance. But again, there was a referendum. And we point out in our memo some other language irregularities that I won't get into for purposes of this presentation. The purpose of this ordinance, again, this brings me back to the purpose of this ordinance. One is to sort of clarify or clean up what occurred back in 2006 and have an ordinance that clearly states, if it is the policy decision of the council, that the Open Space Trust Fund monies be used for all of the purposes that they're permitted to use the money for under existing law. That includes not only the enumerated provisions set forth in the 1997 law, but also includes a new provision which just became law in January of this year, and that is for Blue Acres purposes, basically to buy flood-prone properties with Open Space Trust Fund monies is a new purpose. And that law was just enacted this year. And I have to give kudos to Pat, because at the time that we had prepared the ordinance, my associate informs me that Westlaw had not changed the title, which Pat pointed out at the last meeting, so we made that correction to the ordinance. The other is to codify existing past practices of the municipality. The township has, in fact, been using open space trust fund monies to pay debt service on bonds for open space and recreation projects. That has, in fact, occurred. That occurred under the previous administration and under the administration before that. So that has, in fact, been the practice of the town. So this ordinance will also, codify or legitimate that purpose, as well as provide for that use going forward. And finally, which is really more of a housekeeping item, is to just rename the fund. The law, for whatever reason, it just required you to rename the fund, and that really comes under the category of housekeeping. Here's what the ordinance does. Number one, it clearly provides what the fund can be used for, so that there isn't any misunderstanding or questions in that regard. It is very clear. And again, your ordinance would mirror the state statute and provide you with all of the flexibility to use the open space trust fund monies in the manner that the New Jersey State Legislature and then Governor Whitman and now Governor Christie have decided that you should be able to use the money for. Number two, the way we've prepared the ordinance, again, this is a policy question, it maintains the allocation of percentages contained in the 2006 referendum. Why? Because there was a referendum, the voters did approve that, you have an ordinance that provides for that. I understand that's been the practice anyway, so it sort of codifies past practice in that regard. So we have maintained those percentages. If you want to change those percentages, you certainly can. I don't think there's no prohibition against that, but we've maintained that. The other thing that we did was we defined the term acquisition, which is a term that in connection with the turf fields project has come up, and we've defined the term acquisition. And frankly, we've defined it in the manner that is identical to the definition in the state statutes, which is contained at 40:12-15.1. Now, there is one provision in the existing ordinance that we intended to remove and repeal. And I can't refer to it by section because there really isn't a section, but it's in section 15-7, which is entitled Accumulation and Use of Funds. Again, this is in the existing ordinance. It's the last paragraph, and I'll read it. It says, in the event the entire annual allocation in one or two above, one refers to a percentage for capital improvements, and two refers to a percentage of historic properties, is not required for such purpose in any year, the balance shall be allocated to acquisition of land and improvements for open space purposes. We have, the effect of the new ordinance would be to eliminate that provision. And, the reason for that, and again, that is a policy decision to be made by the council. The reason for that is, number one, there was no provision in the 2006 referendum that referenced that language. And again, in trying to codify existing practice and try to maintain some consistency with respect to policy matters that were referenced in the 2006 referendum, that language deviates from that, so we proposed eliminating it. And secondly, that will give you a lot more flexibility in terms of how you want to use your open space monies, and would enable you to maintain your percentages for recreation and historic preservation as the voters approved back in 2006. But again, that is a policy decision. So that's an overview of what the ordinance is, what its purpose is, what it's intended to do. And I think that if you take a look at sort of the way open space trust fund legislation and practice has been applied in Parsippany over the last, since 1988, we certainly saw the need to clean it up and get it straight going forward, and so that's why we're proposing the ordinance.
John, I have a question. With reference to the last point that you addressed, regarding if allocations are not used in a particular year, they divert back to the full fund. We're changing it, but does the change apply now or prospectively?
It would apply now.
It would apply now?
It would apply now, because, I mean, the other problem with the ordinance, as it's written right now, it says for open space purposes. Open space purposes is really not defined, and you could interpret that to mean a lot of different things. So again, in terms of clarity, in terms of consistency with the 2006 referendum, that's what we've recommended. But again, that's your call. That's a policy decision. Any way you wanted to go on that would be fine from a legal perspective.
Okay, yeah, because, so ordinance passes, mayor signs it, so as of the signing, 40% will stay of what's in the fund now will stay for recreation.
That's correct, because what we do is we repeal any provisions of the existing ordinance that are inconsistent with this ordinance. So the new ordinance, to the extent there's any inconsistency between the old ordinance and the new ordinance would govern. So whatever your amount of money is in the open space trust fund right now, 0.8 of 1 cent would be allocated for recreation.
And I asked a question because I read the new ordinance, I didn't see it in there, but you say it's a policy decision. Shouldn't it be in the ordinance now? This ordinance will apply currently and prospectively.
Well, it does. It specifically says that it repeals any provisions that are inconsistent with it. And that's in Section 7. All ordinances or part of ordinances of the township heretofore adopted that are inconsistent with any of the provisions and terms and provisions of this ordinance are hereby repealed to the extent of such inconsistency.
I know, I'm just asking because we're in March, and obviously we've been collecting open space money January, February, March, so I guess it would have been helpful to have maybe something in there. I don't know, maybe pass the ordinance, but add a rider to it or something that says, now we can start, breaking down the money into certain percentages.
Well, legally, my opinion is you can, and that's what the ordinance is intended to do. And we say that by repealing the existing ordinance to the extent it's inconsistent with this ordinance, and that's exactly what we attempted to do.
Yes. Go. You have 3 minutes, and we will have a open public after.
Should be.
No. Yeah, because when he tapped it, it didn't
Time's up.
tap it. There you go.
Okay, Rick McNulty, 5 St. John's. The first question is just housekeeping. It was read by, I forget who was it Mr. Ferrara, that this was read into the Delhi record on January 13th, 2012. But I believe this was changed since the last meeting. So I would like to see the record where this exact was printed in the paper. And then if you go to outside the clerk's office where it says available to the public, it also has the one that was available to the public as of January 14th, not this one that is available tonight. So I would like to know how we could pass if there hasn't been a first reading of this exact verbiage.
The answer is pretty simple. There were a couple of typographical errors that were pointed out at the last meeting, as well as the addition of floodplain protection. Those are not material changes to the ordinance, and the ordinance will be published after passage, and my legal opinion is that's fine. There's no need to reintroduce.
A lot goes along with your legal opinion.
Well, you're free to challenge it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Intention. It's been used often by Mr. Inglesino, and it was even referred to by Mr. DiPiero today. I think the council should look at what the actual intention of previous councils would be, and also what your intention is, and if it's actually being reached in the verbiage that is here. You asked some questions, and I would agree that I don't think all the verbiage or the intentions that you're asking for, Mr. Cesaro, I did look at you, though I didn't refer to you as in name, that the intention What is the intention of the township that originally voted on it back in '89, the intention of the township that voted on the referendum in 2006, and what is the intention of those councils that have then passed on certain codified the ordinances past that time? Are we, or you, the town council today, are you staying within that intention, or are you just taking on what may be the flavor of the week or year of what the intention and how we should use it moving forward? The last part is just about the funds and going forward is the 40%. It is very easy to do an audit and figure out exactly how much taxes come in, how much has gone to each exact thing,
30 seconds.
and break it down that much. We don't have to just take this big bundle of money of $5.5 to $6 million and break it up 10%, 40%, and 50%. It is very easy to ask Ruby exactly how much money has spent and put that much money in each exact. If there was any money left over in the recreation portion, then put that in. There's no sense of taking 40% and just lumping it in there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Has he had his 3 minutes?
He's got 3 seconds left.
No, because I want to answer Mr. McNulty on the flavor of the week comment, and I know you weren't trying to be malevolent with that comment. I think I could speak. I know myself and Mr. DePiero were on the council at the time in '06. We had used it for recreation improvement because at the time with the former administration, we were reviewing the budget, and he had about $750,000 worth of recreation capital improvements in there,
Okay.
which is a tax increase, because you're going to put out 5% bond, you're paying for it through tax increase. So I had, at the time, said, wait,
06.
I'm sorry, '06.
Okay.
Well, it passed '07, the '07 budget. And I had said at the time, wait a minute, there was a referendum passed last year. Can we use that money, well, the money that you'd be collecting, that would be allocated for recreation, pay for these improvements, so at least we don't have to charge or assess through a tax increase the 5% down payment on those. So we did it. So it's not something we're doing, wow, people came in, they want the Field of Dreams, we're going to come up with it has been done in the past.
Oh, absolutely. I've
That's how
I don't want to cut you off,
No,
but
no,
can
I
you
just
save
wanted
it
to
for
answer-
the open
I
public?
wanted to wait till
Just
you were
gonna have
finished. That's why.
I was not disagreeing that we use this for recreation
Yeah.
purposes or capital improvements.
I heard your question to be, is it something we're doing now, or has it been done in the past? That's how I understood
Fine.
your question.
Misinterpretation. Thank you.
No, no problem,
I
absolutely.
was going to respond to that,
Thank
too,
you.
from my perspective. The 1988 referendum, because I was here for all of that. The 1988 referendum, our sole intention was to establish open space funds. Okay, when the state statute came out later and expanded what we could use that money for, including historic preservation, maintenance, okay, then we were informed that the only way we could change a referendum is with another referendum. Whether that was wise or not, that's what we were told. So we put out another referendum. Our intent was to conform to the state statute and provide what else the state allowed us to do that. Now, the way, after the referendum of 2006, the way the ordinance was written or codified, okay, it didn't really align with the state statute. And that's what our counselor now is cleaning up, so that we now align with the state statute. We're not often, like we didn't even verbalize in here that we could pay the bond indebtedness for open space purchase. I mean, that's ridiculous. How else are you going to purchase open space if you don't bond for it? You don't pay out a current fund. So it wasn't worded, verbiage wasn't there. So Mr. Inglesino cleaned all that stuff up, and that's really what we're doing now is we're now conforming to the state statute.
Okay, thank you.
Pat Patacha, 182 Hawkins Avenue. Mayor Barbario and Town Council members. On March 16th, I picked up the CD of the 313 agenda meeting from the Town Hall. I also inquired at that time if any changes were made to the Open Space Trust Fund ordinance since that date. I was advised there was. I took a copy of it that day. This latest ordinance change still has problems with it. Page 3 of the ordinance. Open Space Trust Fund utilized for. On number 6, you were saying payment of debt service. New Jersey statute does not allow for debt service on maintenance. Number 3, and on to number 6. Go to number 6. I see your confusion in your face.
No, there's no confusion. The verbiage in here is taken right out of 15.7.
No, it's not. It's not. You will see that maintenance is not on the state statute. They totally ignore it. And probably because we've been using 1, 2, 3, and 4 instead of A, B, C, and D, like the state statute has. But number 3 is maintenance in here, and that should be removed. And what's left out is the Blue Acres. Number 7 should be added to number 6. And that I had stated last week also.
You are
And-
correct. Number 7 should be added.
Yeah. And number 3 should be removed, because that is for maintenance of lands acquired for recreation and conservation. State statute does not allow that. Also, down in section B, oh wait, now I'm going ahead of my choices here. Okay. So that would have to be removed, 7 would have to be added. On section 3A, you changed the wording on number 1 from renovations and improvements to improvements and maintenance. Renovation is to restore to a better state. Maintenance is to upkeep the property.
Sorry, where are you, Pat?
Right on number 1 under section 3.
Hold on. Section
Number
3A1. Okay.
You're using the word maintenance. The wording used to be renovations and improvements. Now you're saying improvements and maintenance. Maintenance, again, is not covered under state statute, so something's wrong with that wording. Okay, section 3B. Again, debt service can't be used for maintenance. Number 3 should be removed from this section. Okay. Town council members, as our elected officials, I would have hoped that you would have reviewed this ordinance
seconds, Pat.
and found these discrepancies. This will now be this, give me a few minutes. I had to show him
You
where
have
we...
30 seconds.
I'm sorry, I have not done that far. Table, town council members, as elected officials, I would have hoped that you would have reviewed this ordinance and found these discrepancies. This will now be the second time corrections are needed to this ordinance, and I suggest the following. 1, table this ordinance. I feel it would be the best interest of the town council to table this matter. This ordinance should not come before the town council or the public with incorrect information. Please take the time to get it perfect. We made big mistakes in the past. Let's not
Just
continue
finish the
them in the
sentence,
future. I can't... Now, honestly, that was not 3 minutes.
No, it's 3:10.
No,
Sorry.
it wasn't.
Pat, your time's up. I'm sorry.
I was interrupted.
Pat, your time's up. I'm sorry.
Are you gonna?
You could
Okay.
come back and do it during
We
the
have
No.
5 minutes open,
No.
but the
You're
time's
gonna
up.
vote on it, and I'd still want to continue reading.
The time's
Please
up.
make the exception.
I can't, because then I got to make the
Okay.
exception for 20 people, Pat. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What a gag order you have.
This
The
is...
gag order that I should
Yes,
have.
this is...
When 20 people get up, I can't sit here and let people keep going.
The lawyer was interrupting me. I had to show him where things were. That took time from my statement.
You got 2 extra minutes less.
Vinny, don't even
We're-
try
I'm
to...
going by
This
the
is not a
time.
goofy
You have 3
matter.
minutes.
Oh, I'm not laughing.
Violated.
Ray Vigano, 16 Whitewood Drive. I made a comment last week when I was here that this council has approached this thing with the Field of Dreams in a very convoluted manner. I made an analogy.
Mr. Just a
This
point
is
of
the
order.
ordinance only.
This is public comment on the
I'm
ordinance.
going to get to the ordinance.
But sir, if I may, just because there does have to be a certain
Okay.
protocol
I
and
would
procedure.
suggest that this council is not prepared to vote on this ordinance. The constant changing of the verbiage and the explanation given by your attorney is not sufficient for me to ascertain whether I think this is something that I would feel comfortable the council approving. I think you should get the words finalized, issue it, so the public and the taxpayers of Parsippany can review it and come back and make intelligent comments instead of constantly hearing changes, revisions, exceptions, inclusions. You are not prepared to vote on this tonight.
Mary Przicki, 273 Marcella Road. I have been asking myself, what happened to the honor and integrity that was present in these council chambers? I can't believe that 3-4 times ordinances that were first introduced have been changed and changed and changed. When you look at the advertisement that you put in the Daily Record on February 20th, 2012, it doesn't equate to what you're doing today. And yet you re-advertise it and you change it and you change it. The public doesn't have a decent idea of what you guys are even wanting to do. The bad housekeeping practices for the Open Space Trust Fund started from its inception and has continued to the present day. One just has to look at the ordinance you present tonight. It was advertised one way on the 20th in the Daily Record and another way on the 13th, I believe you said. What is before you and the residents of Parsippany has added language and item changes. If you will you do the honorable thing and table the ordinance until the right wording is re-advertised in the legal section of the Daily Record, since you even seem to want to make changes tonight? The intentions of the ordinance needs to be clarified, or would you railroad this ordinance through without the proper notice, or for the people to absorb even what you're doing? The housekeeping practices used in writing the ordinance has taken the alphabetical letters that are in the state statute 40-12-15-7 and changing them to numbers. The numbers were not legally advertised on the 20th. Maybe they were on the 13th. The
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Give me a break. I know
30
what
seconds.
this is. The state statute's alphabetical system was not in the legal was in the legal ads. Okay, then I'll go to the end. Will you do the honorable thing and table the ordinance, or will you use the opinionated legal language to vote on this ordinance tonight? Do you have the honor and integrity to do the right thing, or has the dreams of fields clouded your judgment? Will you now continue the wrong and vote for this ordinance change tonight, or will you allow the question of bonding and debt services to go before the voters of Parsippany as a referendum? Will you do the honorable thing and take the fast track? The choice is yours. Do what is right for Mother Nature and the voters of Parsippany. I hope your choice will put you in a position of respect and not shame. And it's shameful when you cannot be able to use your right to freedom of speech at a public hearing. You're a disgrace.
Thank you.
Before I begin your count, sorry?
Name and address, please.
Hank Heller, 10 Fenwick Place. My understanding was that there were 5 minutes
That's
allocated.
the public. This is on the ordinance only. 3 minutes towards the public will be fine.
Then I'm going to speak fast, gentlemen, okay? Mr. Mayor and members of the Town Council, I'm here tonight as a citizen and taxpayer in Parsippany since 1970. My children grew up here and played organized sports on all the fields of this town. I've not felt the need to visit a Town Council meeting for 37 years. I've also been a staunch Republican since way before I moved my family to Parsippany. In fact, I've voted for most of the people on this town council, and you too, Mr. Mayor. Further, I've voted in favor of the referendums establishing the Open Space Trust Fund for Morris County, and each of the referendums asking to improve the original resolution. But I cannot support this change that you propose tonight, which will change the entire intent of the original legislation. This change will permit you to take monies that were voted into your care for the purchase of parks and open space for all the citizens of Parsippany and convert that for the special benefit of a limited number of citizens, the athletes of both high schools and the various sports clubs in Parsippany. When this administration is no longer, those high school fields will not be under the control of the Parsippany Board of Education. How a later administration deals with those lands can only be prayed over, since no one can promise what will happen in the future. That is why I'm vehemently opposed to changing the current Open Space Trust Fund from what the voters of Parsippany voted for and changing it to a convenient tool to accommodate some of the voters of Parsippany. If you want to change the current Open Space Trust Fund to something that pleases your needs better,
bring it to a vote of the taxpayers and see what they have to say. The current name of the legislation under discussion is Open Space Trust Fund. I want to bring to your attention that many of your citizens have been discussing the issues publicly for some time now. I know you've paid a lot of attention to Parsippany Patch and Parsippany Life. Is it not clear to each of you that you are sullying your reputations by causing the public to distrust you, their elected officials, because their elected officials have forgotten that they are responsible to all of the citizens to make sure that the Open Space Trust Fund monies can be in fact entrusted to their handling. I know you think you're doing the right thing in the handling of this situation, but I'm hoping that your egos have not gotten the best of you by thinking that you know what's best. If you think you're right, put it to a vote by referendum. Then you will be doing the right thing for all the people of Parsippany and not just a vocal and well-organized group of friends. I'm fearful that this situation is not, if it's not handled in a more open and fairer way than it already has, then my local party of choice will suffer greatly in future elections. While it may seem like I'm against you, please know that I am doing my very best to protect each and every one of you, as well as protect the citizens of Parsippany who disagree with the current approach. Lastly, if the Board of Ed does give its permission to cede 51% control of the high school fields to the town, each of those who vote to do that should be ashamed of their lack of intellect in giving over one of the school's most treasured possessions, land, and the current use, which is cheap in benefit. School fields belong in the control of the Board of Education, not ever-changing politicians. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Hi, Julia Peterson, 25 Old Parsippany Road. I'm very concerned about the language used in this proposed ordinance, and I'm worried about the changes that it implies. It seems to alter the purposes of open space, as originally enacted here, and it seems to remove citizen due diligence from the equation. The state statute, NJSA 4012-15-1, defines recreation and conservation purposes. And quote, this is right from the Act, the use of lands for parks, open space, natural areas, ecological and biological study, forests, water reserves, wildlife preserves, fishing, hunting, camping, boating, winter sports, similar uses for either public outdoor recreation or conservation of natural resources. This definition implies less developed lands, not maintaining sports facilities. This law also requires many actions which protect the public interest in the use of open space funds. I understand we need to align with the state statute, but why are we not conforming to its requirements for a true public hearing, 45-day notice period, and a written public comment period? Why are we ignoring its requirement that any expenditures from these funds be made according to existing acquisition and maintenance plans? This council adopted a 5-year open space and recreation plan last April 4th. Why are you ignoring your own plan? Recreation is more than organized sports. Public recreation can be informal and individual. Citizens depend on this council to remember that their varied needs for recreation are also important and may be different. Why in the proposed ordinance is there no mention of the composition, appointment, and responsibilities of an open space committee? Do you not feel the need for citizens in advisory capacities? Do you feel the need to control completely a source of monies that the taxpayers chose to impose on themselves? This ordinance puts open space funds under the control of the town council. I voted in a 2006 referendum. I did not vote to give our government carte blanche in the spending of funds earmarked for preserving open space in Parsippany. I did not predict that the development and maintenance would be prioritized over acquisition. I did not foresee the day when the use of these funds would be manipulated by elected officials for their own purposes. Neither did many other voters. Luckily, there's a way for us to have a voice. The Open Space Fund was established by referendum. It should be changed only by referendum. We never agreed to use these funds for bonding. In the past, funds have been used to leverage and match other funds.
30 seconds.
If they've been used for bonding, that was never approved. This ordinance should be changed by referendum, not by questionable and hasty administrative manipulation. I ask you as council members to prevent the abuse of voter sentiment in the town. You serve as our voice in preserving the trust that is implied in a trust fund. Thank you.
My name is Bob Farbanish, 6 Inwood Road. I want to thank the township attorney. Your February 14th letter, that really helped understand all this, okay? But I've got a question following up what Mr. Cesario said about the money that's left over in the fund. I understand if we don't spend it, the original ordinance says it has to be used for open space. That's what your letter says. Okay. So my question is, since 2011 is gone, and of course what you collected in 2012, presumably you haven't allocated yet, so that's not a problem. Does that mean that this money can only be used for open space? You're repealing section of the Township Code 51-7, but the money's already been allocated, right? Because the existing ordinance is still in effect until you pass this ordinance. So therefore, all the money that's been allocated up to the beginning of this year, which wasn't spent, has to be used for open space. That's the current law, which means you can't use it. Future you can use it, but you can't use the stuff that's already been collected last year. That's a follow-up to your question, Mr. Cesario.
Well, that's why I asked, because I read the new ordinance, and I just wanted to make sure, is it going to retroactively apply to January 1st, or are we going to do this moving forward once it's signed by the administration?
That's not my question. I'm assuming that 2012 is different because you haven't used any funds yet. Okay. My question is,
apply a law retroactively, though.
well, yeah, but the law is the law. The money has been already allocated. It's gone. It's in this fund. You can't take it out, put it somewhere. Well, you say you can. Is that legal?
Yeah.
The law says, the law we have right now says, until you pass a new ordinance, says it has to be used for open space. And presumably, it's there now. It's now in that fund, not in this fund. So how can you all of a sudden take the money from here and put it over there? It doesn't sound legal to me.
Well, the law that you refer to is a municipal ordinance. It's not state statute. And we're not really changing funds. We're changing the name of the fund, which again is more of a housekeeping matter. The township is certainly able to change its ordinance, and in changing its ordinance, it is able to change the allocation of money that has already been allocated under a previous ordinance. One of the problems that I see with the existing ordinance is it says for open space purposes, which all of this is for open space purposes under the law. So I don't think that the original ordinance was nearly as clearly drafted as it could be. But to answer your question directly, they can certainly change the allocation of the monies because they can change the ordinance.
Does that mean if you put money in a pension fund, you can take it and put it someplace else?
Well, they're not managing pension funds.
No, but I guess the point I'm making is, you state in your letter...
Sir, you have 30 seconds, okay? So if you want to ask all the questions, then he can answer you, okay?
But you said in your letter, you have to repeal Section 51-7, because you can't use the funds unless you repeal that section. I understand that. Well, my question again is, right now, that section is valid. Until you do something, that's valid. The money has now been reallocated. I don't understand how you can reallocate it, because we passed 2 referendums, an ordinance saying this is what the law is, and now you're telling me you can just go, I'll just take it out of this pocket, put in that pocket? Why do you have ordinances? Why do you have referendums?
Well, again, the referendum that takes any money not used for one of the specific purposes within the year and then dumps it into the quote-unquote general fund was not part of the ballot question in 2006. That's not there. Number 2 is that the allocations and the, for purposes of ease of understanding, we'll call it the, I don't know what the right way to call it is, but the money that kind of goes back into the general fund is a creature of ordinance and can be changed by ordinance. It is a policy decision to be made by the governing body. They can change their laws. They can change their ordinances. I mean, if you have a street that says, speed limit is 25 miles an hour, they can change it to 35 if they want. They can change the ordinances with respect to matters that they control, and that is a specific item that is within their control, and there's nothing inappropriate or improper for them changing it. And to say that the allocation will now be in the percentages that were approved by the voters. In fact, the ordinance proposal puts the ordinance in conformity with what the voters approved in 2006 with regard to the allocations and the remaining of the allocations over time without it reverting back into some general pot.
Now I wonder why people
Sorry, I got
mistrust,
it. Time's up, though.
mistrust politicians.
Jonathan Nelson, 202 Patriots Road. I guess speaking by proxy for Pat Pataccia and finishing her statement. So these are Pat's words, and I'm reading it for the first time. And one thing I want to say is she's an incredibly smart person, and I really just want to hear what she had to say, so that's why I'm reading it. Okay, so Pat wrote, "Town council members, as elected officials, I would have hoped that you would have reviewed this ordinance and found these discrepancies. This will now be the second time corrections are needed to this ordinance, and I suggest the following. 1. Table this ordinance. I feel it would be in the best interest of the town council to table this matter. The ordinance should not come before the town council or the public with incorrect information. Please take the time to get it perfect. We made big mistakes in the past. Let's not continue them in the future. 2. Revised ordinance should be given to the town council for review prior to bringing it to the public. As elected officials, you have an obligation to the taxpayers of Parsippany to know exactly what is being asked of you and the taxpayers. 3. Since changes were made to our Open Space Trust Fund ordinance after publication in the Daily Record, I believe we have to start over. New publication in the Daily Record when ordinance is deemed correct and proper, and new public hearings. 4. This ordinance then should go to referendum. Vote of the people, State Statute 4012-15.7. We are adding recreation and conservation allows for public vote. Bonding and debt service were never voted on by the taxpayers. Is our town council willing to put the taxpayers in this position without a vote? These are our tax dollars. At this time, I ask the town council to consider the needs of the community before a special interest group. Do what is right for the community. Parsippany's Open Space Trust Fund is becoming the mayor's slush fund, and as a taxpayer, don't want to see that happen. I also would like to know if I can get paid for the research I have done on this ordinance. Should not any ordinance be correct before going before the town council? Sincerely, Pat Pataccia."
Good evening, Bob Crawford, 35 Hidden Glen.
Thank you.
35 Hidden
Okay,
Glen.
go ahead. You're good. You're good.
We had to fix the clock. Go.
Thank you. Can I get a point of clarification in terms of process? Have you all voted on this ordinance already?
No.
You have not, okay, because we couldn't quite figure out what was going on with the race earlier. Second of all, Mr. Inglesino, have you heard anything that you would now define as material with regard to the ordinance? Because that was your benchmark originally before all this information was surfaced. Or do you still believe that indeed all of these issues that have been brought up are immaterial with regard to having to not vote on the ordinance tonight, get it right, publish it, and go through the proper process? Where do you stand right now in terms of the materiality of the changes?
I don't see any material changes to
You
this
see no
ordinance.
material changes despite everything. Thank you. And let me go back to an issue, Mr. Inglesino. Something you said quite a bit was the importance of consistency in terms of the approach. In fact, you used that term over and over and over again in your presentation, which was very helpful. That is important for the processes to be consistent. And yet I was struck that Mr. DiPiero was good enough to explain to us what happened in 2006, whereas indeed the council then was advised by a lawyer that indeed it was a legal requirement to have a referendum. And yet tonight, with all respect, another lawyer is saying just the opposite. Quite frankly, that leads some concern on my part. With all respect to your prowess as a lawyer merely a number of years ago gave you exactly the opposite advice. So I would ask the council.
The only problem with that, you ask 10 lawyers a question, you're going to get 10 answers.
I know, sir, but you are now basing your action on the opinion of a lawyer.
That's
and I'm simply surfacing that indeed a number of years ago a lawyer gave a very different bit of advice, which is advice that many of us are asking the council to follow. I was also struck in terms of the comments that Mr. Inglesino made, and it was a little difficult to weave or untangle that which was policy and that which was law, but I understand that it's a complicated issue. But you used terms such as, it is apparent, that's a gray area, it's our opinion, it's our view. Those concern me with regard to where it was opinion as opposed to where it was law, and I would just encourage this council to be very comfortable around the fact that you're acting upon an opinion, a legal opinion, and yet you carry the responsibility going forward. I have just two short questions about the ordinance which I don't understand. Section number 6, it says, if any section, paragraph, subsection, and so forth and so on, shall be declared invalid by a court or of competent jurisdiction, such decision shall not affect the validity of this ordinance as a whole or any part thereof. So if we should take this challenge, this ordinance in court, what you are now saying is that even though a court might indeed disagree with the action you all have taken, that wouldn't hold, is that correct?
No, this is a very boilerplate provision. It's called the severability clause, and what it means is that if a particular part of the ordinance is ruled invalid by a court, it doesn't invalidate the whole ordinance, it just invalidates that specific part. And that's a very boilerplate provision.
Well, it's also a very powerful provision, you know,
Well,
stated the way it's stated, and it does create some concern insofar as a court could, based upon this ordinance, make a declaration, and by this ordinance, you could argue that when this ordinance was passed, it was passed saying that if a court did make an opposing decision, that it wouldn't be valid, is what it says, which is very disturbing.
No, it just says that if a court just
Mr. Crawford,
arbitrarily,
your time
for
is up.
instance...
I understand, but
I know, I gave you extra time.
Yeah.
Here.
No,
If a
you're
court
not
were to
giving me
say-
anything.
I did.
You're not giving me anything.
Look.
Excuse me.
If a court were to say Section 1 is invalid, then Section 1 would be invalid, but the rest of the ordinance would still be valid. It's
But
very-
then could we phrase this section to state that? Because this is a blanket statement.
Mr. Crawford,
No,
I
this
do have
is-
to...
I appreciate that, but I just think that's another material change that needs to be made. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Crawford, just in response to your opinion versus... Yeah, in response to your opinion versus law, and I think we were clear about this in our opinion letter from February 14th. Okay. That all arises in the context of whether or not currently open space trust funds can be used legally to pay debt service on bonds used for open space projects. Under the way the current law provides, current ordinance, I say probably. Why do I say probably? Why do I say it's my opinion probably? Because when you look at the current ordinance, it doesn't specifically say you can use it for debt service, okay? But the past practice has been to use it for debt service under the previous administration and under the administration before that. You heard from Councilman Cicero and Councilman DePiro, both of whom were councilmen back in 2006, say that it was their intent to be able to avail themselves of all of the flexibility that the statute provided from 1997. The problem is that the ordinance, as it states now, doesn't expressly give the council that flexibility. And so if I have to stand before a judge and argue, well, can we use open space money for debt service, I think probably yes, I can certainly make that argument. But if the ordinance that is before the council for consideration tonight is enacted, then I can say very matter-of-factly and very clearly that they can, because this ordinance strengthens and clarifies what the council intends today, and based upon the remarks from the two council folks who were here back in 2006, isn't a change, but simply clarifies what was intended back then.
But the sins of prior administration will mitigate the need of this council to do the right thing.
I don't see it as sin. I mean, I think that my job as a lawyer is to try and, you know, make things as clear as possible where there's a need to, and we found, has been very open about it, a need to clarify the existing ordinance with regard to the use of open space trust fund monies.
Thank you.
My name's Tara Ann San Angelo. I'm with the law firm of Gregory and Reed, and I represent a group of citizens known as Parsippany Unite. I forwarded a letter today to Mr. Inglesino laying out who are official members of the group right now. Didn't forward it to him until 4 o'clock, so I don't know if he got to share it with the council yet.
4:15, I
4:15.
gave it to the clerk, but we didn't have the copy ability to get it to everybody, so we'll do that promptly
I have
after
extra
the meeting.
copies if you would like to see it tonight. I laid out 4 separate issues in there, but in light of Mr. Inglesino's comments at the beginning of this session, I think I really want to restrict it to one area, and that is the ordinance that's been published on the website and actually what you gave out tonight it's 2 different versions, and so I think we needed clarification on which version was being voted on tonight. The one you handed out references that payment of debt service can be used for purposes set forth in sections 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and that includes maintenance, which is not included in the state statute. But the version on the website says you can use it for purposes set forth in subsections A, B, D, E, or G, which there's no subsections A, B, D, or G in the ordinance as it stands right now. So I think everyone needs clarification on what these subsections refer to and whether or not maintenance is included in the ability to pay debt service.
Well, clearly,
Mrs. Santangelo, can you do me a favor?
Sure.
Ask all your questions, and then he can answer them all, because you got a time limit. So, you know what I mean? If
Yes.
you're done, that's fine, but otherwise, keep on going with your questions. We'll write them down and answer you at the end. Otherwise, you're not going to
I believe
get
that's all we have right now. We just want
Okay.
clarification on the ordinance.
Sorry.
the ordinance to be voted on is the most recent one that includes the title of floodplain protection and simply just changes the letters to numbers. I would recommend, and changes the letters to numbers. That's what I'm advising.
And just for clarification, does that include, which I believe in here is provision 3, does that include maintenance?
It includes maintenance to the extent they're legally able to do that, but obviously if maintenance is not a capital item, then you can't bond for it, and if you can't bond for it, then you can't use debt service on a bond to pay for it.
Really, because this says A, B, D, E, so it skips over C, so I'm wondering, does C refer to 3? That's the clarification.
Well, you just have to look.
Does it correspond that way? Is that?
I'm sorry. You've been retained by them, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, guys, how are you? Isn't this better with correspondence between you and him? Because now you're going over a drafting session in this council, and you're speaking to us directly in that microphone, and I'm represented by a lawyer, and so is this council and this mayor.
These were issues also addressed by the other. I'm sorry.
just speaking
Yeah.
as a lawyer under the RPCs.
Well, I think we need clarification on what's being
Okay.
voted on tonight.
Okay. No, I'm just saying.
That's really what my question is.
I'd love to talk to you all day, but I just can't do it as if you've been retained by another person. And
Right.
you're approaching this council, the microphone, which is great. It's good to talk to you. Hello. But if you're going back and forth to try to change this ordinance, you should do it with Mr. Inglesino.
Not necessarily change it, to just clarify what we're voting on today, because what's been given out on the website, what's been given out here, and what's been in the newspaper are all different things.
I understand.
So I guess before people can even make a...
What's being voted on is what is before the council, the most recent publication of the ordinance.
Time's up.
Which I
Mr.
think you have.
I have a question for you. I was under the understanding that the state statute allowed us to use open space funds for maintenance. Now, maintenance is, we don't bond for maintenance. Maintenance is a current expense usually, but it's still,
Correct.
the funds are still from open space, are they not?
That's correct.
So we don't bond for it, but we do use open space funds for maintenance of fields and those things that are allowed by state statute.
That is correct.
Okay. The other question I have is, the changes that Pat Patacha offered tonight, are those substantial or are those minor? Because I'm beginning to get uncomfortable about voting on this when everything is not in one package.
You can certainly do that. She has referenced typographical issues from the last meeting that were changed, and you have an ordinance that is ready to be voted on tonight. If you want to reintroduce to include those typographical errors, reintroduce and redo a public hearing, you can certainly do that if you would like.
Well, I know Mr. Farbanish and I see eye to eye on that one issue about when does it take effect. That was my issue. But like I said, I'll accede to the council discussing it. They like to discuss it.
I got a quick question. I know there's still people that want to get out. I'm going to cut you off before you get out. As president, I would like to make a motion. The wording needs to be changed. Even for the council, we want to see the clear picture too. I'm making a motion that we table this ordinance.
I'll second that.
Roll call.
Not necessary, please.
You in the back with the beard, please sit. I know him, I can tease him.
Roll call, please.
Okay, Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro.
Still supportive of the Field of Dreams concept, but yes to table it.
Mr. DePiero.
Should we defeat it or table it? Defeat it and reintroduce? I'm asking
I would like to table this so
our
we can get the
attorney.
clear version in writing.
Well, I think if you're not comfortable proceeding tonight on the basis of some of the typographical issues, then what you should do is you can vote to table, and at the next meeting, you can just vote to reintroduce, and then adopt.
A modified version, a corrected version.
Well, it would be the same version that's before you tonight, but it would just be brought again at a later date.
And let's,
With the clear
Would it
verbiage.
not include the changes that Pat Pataglia suggested and clarify the question that Mr. Cesaro recommended?
Well, I think it addresses both of those questions. I can certainly speak with Councilman Cesaro to see if he would like to see some changes to the ordinance. I can certainly.
That was my one issue.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. I think the ordinance.
I don't think it needs a change. I think it just needs to be explained.
Yeah, just need the verbiage needs to be cleaned up.
Well, the way we structured it is that, for any provision in the ordinance that is inconsistent with this ordinance is repealed. The only way I could further clarify it, but I don't want to confuse it with other verbiage, is I could actually set forth that paragraph language in the current ordinance that is not referenced by any section. It's the end of section 7, I think it is, and specifically state that is being excluded. 51-7. That's why I referenced the intent was to repeal that provision. We don't list that provision expressly in the ordinance and say this is being repealed.
Right.
We could do that. The reason why we didn't do that was because we have a general provision that says that any of the terms that are inconsistent with the new ordinance would be repealed from the old ordinance. We could certainly add a provision that adds this specifically and then catch-all with regard to all other language. That's why I wanted to highlight this language to make sure that was clear, but we could certainly make that change if you would like.
But that also would not be a substantial change, and therefore we would not have to re-advertise, right?
Well, I mean, it would be a change to the ordinance. It's not a substantive change in terms of what is intended, but I think that if you're going to go back and say that you wanted some changes to be made along those lines, you may as well just re-advertise. If you're going to table it tonight, you might as well just re-advertise.
Re-advertise, okay. All right. I vote yes.
To table. Okay. Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
And Council President Stanton.
Yes. I don't mean to cut you off. You still have your 3 minutes to come up. Yes. Oh, yes, yes.
Actually, it's been tabled.
Oh, wait. The motion's actually been tabled.
It's been tabled.
So, yeah, I didn't want to cut you off. I just don't want to see 20 more people
Yeah,
come
but
up
we're going to the public session now, so they
Yeah.
can still get up during the
Oh,
public
yes.
hearing.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
You can ask any question during the
So what we're going to do is
public.
we're going to close this. It's tabled. Now I'm going to open this session to the public where you have 5 minutes to speak.
Hi, I'm Judy Hernandez, 5 Moraine Road. Do I need to tell you that? Hi.
Yes, please, go
And for full disclosure, I am a member on the Open Space Committee. I did, for the ordinance part of this, I did have a question about, under the New Jersey statute on Section 7C and D. I'm not a lawyer, so I really don't know.
I'm
if
sorry,
these are
section
good-
7, C or D on
Yeah, on the-
statute?
Yeah.
Which statute?
Well, the statute authorizing county and municipal open space taxes and trust funds. Sorry.
Can you just give me the site?
From that.
What do you read?
I said, oh, okay. Well,
7-1, okay.
let me read it to you, and then maybe you could just tell me if I'm thinking right
If I
or
could suggest we let
correctly.
everyone have their full 5 minutes so we don't interrupt them.
Yes.
It just talks about the public, the voters, authorizing or having special elections or elections, and I was wondering if that would indicate that maybe there should be a referendum, as we did have in 2006 when we when we apportioned the funding. I know I came in a little late, so I understand what's going on with the funding somewhat, but it is different. It's a different case, and I was wondering, as we did when we asked the residents to vote by referendum in 2006, that we might not consider doing the same thing now. That was part of it. And I like I said, I didn't really understand the New Jersey statute, but it does refer to the voters of the municipality authorizing by general or special elections amounts raised and purposes of use and amending or implementing a proposition. Okay, now since we're at public portion of this, I just jotted down a few thoughts about this project. I felt the Field of Dreams project was really not introduced to the residents in a productive fashion. The plan was well developed before most of even understood what was transpiring, leaving many as myself wondering why there was not more transparency. We had lots of meetings, lots of hours of discussion, but the details still have really not been fleshed out. And in my opinion, all this conversation is superfluous when we really need to discuss the merits and financing, which now is being taken care of because we're revising the ordinance. So, and I understand there's housekeeping in that too. I understand that this is something that should have been done a few years ago. But the open space and recreation plan that we do have now is a well thought out town-wide assessment of how we will see Parsippany in the future. There are a few dozen recommendations, from creating parks with trails for all to addressing environmentally sensitive areas. We've been doing this before the Blue Acres things was approved. The goals of the plan are commendable, and I encourage all to view the plan on the town website. So my question is, even though I did have a question and I did not vote for it before when we did vote for it because I wasn't sure it was a, appropriate use of the funding, is with all the conversations we've had, and so many of the people have not been brought into the town, I really do believe that this should be brought to a referendum and a vote while you are undergoing these ordinance changes. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
Okay?
Sean.
You want me to? Okay.
Yeah, let her.
Yeah, I'm done because I just changed everything.
Yeah, you're right that 15.7 does speak about referendums and the voters. As I indicated earlier, if Parsippany had not approved the referendum back in 1988, then that would be an applicable provision, and Parsippany would have to go to the voters. Also, if the council was looking to increase the open space tax beyond the current rate, they would also have to go to the voters. But you also have to read 15.8 on the next page, which says propositions deemed approved by the voters. And there it says any municipality whose voters, prior to the effective date of this act, which is Parsippany, this act was effective in 1997, approved pursuant to 40-1210, which was the law Parsippany did approve its open space trust fund, a proposition authorizing the established maintenance and improvement of a system of public recreation, that's Parsippany, shall be deemed to have approved a proposition for any or all of the purposes specified in paragraph 1 of subsection A. Those purposes are the ones that we're talking about: historic preservation, debt service, etc. So what 15.8 says is, if you approve the resolution under the previous law, then the way to take advantage of the expanded purposes of the law is not to go back to referendum, but to adopt an ordinance. That's what 15.8 says. So
you can't do it, or you don't have to do it?
Legally, a referendum has no impact or effect. It's not a legal prerequisite. But don't forget, the township practice has been to use open space monies to pay for debt service. And if the council were to say that, well, we shouldn't have been doing that, then it really creates a potential exposure in terms of, well, now do you have to pay back the open space trust fund for all the monies that you've been using over the years? And I don't think anybody wants to see the town in that position.
Well, I just think the referendum would be a good idea.
And that's why we say that we don't think, we think that the intention, again, based upon the comments by the councilmen who were there, the minutes we reviewed, when you put all the pieces together, We think that was the intent in 2006 with the ordinance, and what this ordinance really does is codify and clean that up.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Pat Venezia, 102 Brooklawn Drive. I have 4 questions. Should I ask them all first?
Yes, thank you.
Today, we have $5.4 million in our open space trust fund. It is restricted today to one purpose, the acquisition of land and improvements for open space preservation. If you pass this proposed ordinance at some point, what would it allow you to spend this $5.4 million on? Are you restricted to the prior? Is it by the percentage proportions in 51.7? Or is it subject to, or is it free fall for all 7 of the possibilities that you list in 51-6? That's 1. 2, under the proposed ordinance, if the council doesn't spend all the annual open space tax money in that year, what happens to the unspent money? Does it go into a bucket for those percentages? I think, Mr. Cesario, you might have been asking one of these questions of the lawyer, and I just could not understand it.
I'll wait.
So I want to know what happens to it. Does it go into the open space trust fund and follow the rules, whatever the answer is to number 1? Or does it go into a bucket for the percentage allocations or something else? 3, under the proposed ordinance, what is the definition of the funds? It's in 51-7B. You say the funds may be utilized for the acquisition of land or development rights as a down payment for the issuance of bonds or the payment of debt service on indebtedness. What funds? Are we talking the entire, the $5.4 million plus any new money? Are we just talking about the annual money that you collected? I couldn't figure it out. And last, I'm not a lawyer, what's the legal definition and difference
Good for you.
between maintenance and improvement as they're used in this open space trust ordinance? Because you use the terms in different places. I don't know what the difference is. Those are my 4 questions.
All right, let me see if I got them here. The first one, well, right now, currently, the Open Space Trust Fund is not limited to acquisition for land and improvements.
Yes, I'm sorry, I thought through the reading of the existing ordinance, the 51.6A and 51.7B seem to indicate it to me. Once again, I'm not a lawyer. You are a lawyer, but I just wanted to say from a layman's point of view.
Right. Well, you know, what's interesting about that is when you read the referendum from 2006, just to confuse you a little more, it says, it talks about in terms of the allocation of percentages. It doesn't say that the trust fund, whether the trust funds can be used for historic preservation. It just allocates X percentage to historic preservation. And that's what the ordinance says. And the ordinance is fine.
No, I'm talking about the $5.4 million that we have now, which is I'm sorry. I'm talking about the $5.4 million that we have now that I understand is a result of unspent funds from prior years. And according to the existing ordinance, according to number 3 there that you mentioned, that goes into spending for, quote, the acquisition of land and improvements for open space preservation today.
Open space purposes, right.
Okay? That is the money that I'm talking about. What, if you pass this ordinance, what will that money be allowed to be spent on?
Okay. That money would be permitted to be spent on the allocations. So you could spend,
This will also answer your number 2.
you could spend, for example, 0.8 cents or roughly 40% of that sum, whatever that is, would be able to be used for capital improvements or maintenance to recreation and conservation purposes. 0.2 cents, whatever that, I don't know what the number is of that, would be able to be used for preservation of historic properties. And then the rest of it would be used for acquisition.
Okay, so you're using section 51.7, basically, the percentages in there.
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, that answers number one. And Mr.
number
Stanton said it would answer number
50,
two.
40, and 10, that's the percentage breakdown.
If it doesn't spend the annual space money, it goes into that same fund, so it gets applied to the same thing, is what you're saying. Correct?
Yes.
That's correct.
No, I'm saying if you pass the proposed ordinance. And in a year, you don't spend all the money for the open space. You have allocated that open space money by the 40, 10, and 50 percentages that we just discussed. Does it go into a bucket for those three things? Or does it go into some general fund that can be spent on anything?
Well,
Because it's not defined here that I could see.
under the proposed ordinance, it would,
Right.
Your time is up. Thank you.
I
under,
was told I could ask the question.
he's going to answer.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
gonna
going to
answer.
answer all the
Thank you.
questions. You just
I
can't keep
can't
on going back and
Oh, I'm
forth.
sorry.
Right.
Okay.
under the proposed ordinance, the allocations that I just referenced would remain. They would just remain. Those allocations would remain. Under the existing ordinance, those allocations do not remain. All the money is in the acquisition fund, for lack of a better term. Okay, but under the new ordinance, the allocations would remain.
And Mrs. Venezia, my question was, when does it start? Does it start as soon as it becomes active law? Prospective, retro?
Now it makes
It would,
sense.
it would, yeah, and the way the ordinance is prepared and the intention of it is, and I want to make sure Councilman Cicero is comfortable with the language in that regard, is that, let's say there's $5.4 million in the fund today. As soon as the law would be passed, then that $5.4 million would be allocated immediately in the percentages that are set forth in the ordinance. That's what the intention of this ordinance would do. I hope that answers your question.
That answers that one.
Oh.
Now we're on to number three.
Yeah, funds is all of the money in the account in the aggregate.
Okay.
And maintenance versus improvements, improvements connote sort of a capital improvement, like a field, a hockey rink or something of that nature. Whereas maintenance is sort of the day-to-day things that you need to do to maintain your improvement.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Venezia, I think that gentleman was calling you.
That's all. Hank Hiller, 10 Fenwick Place, Parsippany. Mr. Inglesino said something earlier that I thought was really important, and I just want to share it with you, because I don't understand an aspect to this. If the use of funds for bonding was applied in prior administrations, in this administration and two prior administrations, and that is the justification for possibly going ahead and using it into the future for funds used for bonding. I understand that. I'm not happy with that idea, and I would like to see somebody argue that point, but since I'm not an attorney, I won't do that, and because I only have a few moments. The additional thing, though, is that if that's the case, where is the logic of not being able to use a referendum, okay, for the new provision, because you have gone back and used a referendum in 2006. So you said that you don't know why they did it, but they did it, and you don't know why they used the funds for bonding in the past, since it wasn't in the provision of the law, but they did it, and that gave justification for continuing to think about it's okay to do that. Well, if we went back and we did a referendum in 2006, why is it not just as applicable to bring this ordinance to a referendum of the people, so that we could all be on the same page together? Okay, and I don't want you to answer that yet, please, if you don't mind. The other thing I want to say is this, please understand, I am not trying to be nasty or mean to anybody, but I really feel that the voters, the people of Parsippany, need your people, when they do their drafting, to do a much better job, so that we have one thing to look at and not try to have to mix and match, and to then go and fix the problem by saying that if any of this is overturned by state law, then the state provisions will apply. However, that does not knock out the other provisions. I think that's what you're basically saying. And my point is that I really put it on each of you gentlemen to make sure that the service that we get from our professionals, whether it's our financial professionals, it's our legal professionals, our accounting professionals, is the very best, and that we don't have to decide whether or not we can mix and match this so that it works, because the people of Parsippany deserve better. You deserve better, and John, your people deserve better, to give you a better product too. And now I'm retired.
Well, I take responsibility for the product because it's my office. You know, the title wasn't, new law wasn't available at the time, okay?
But there are three versions of this thing.
Well, it wasn't available.
Can you just speak in the microphone, sir, please?
It wasn't available at the time.
We're talking about three versions that we're asking these folks to figure out what we're really talking about.
Which is why we tabled it.
Yeah, and I'm respectful of that, okay? But it shouldn't have even come to that, okay? And the explanation that, well, we can fix it later by, if anything, if we're smart enough to figure out something later on that does not agree with what you guys have decided to do, okay, then we're in a legal battle, we're in a legal position, and we shouldn't have to be there. We should be able to come to agreement on the front end that we all want to do this. And by the way, many of us are not adverse to doing what's being asked to do. We just don't appreciate, many of us, that is myself, the approach that we're using to get there. Okay? I'd like to see the Board of Ed use their money and do it properly so that they keep control of the fields that they can never get back, possibly, unless you guys decide to give them a gift. I think that's hugely wrong for our students. Thank you, guys.
Mr. Heller, in regards to the debt service, well, one thing we can thank is the turf field project, because this would have never came about if we didn't realize that we wanted to use open space trust money, because when I was researching back in, if you go to the budgets of 1999, 2000, and 2001, and under the debt service section, it's clear that the total debt budgeted was reduced by $225,000 each year from 1999, 2000, and 2001.
Right.
And then when I went to the 2008 and 2009 and 10 budgets, I saw that money was being, it was debt service being charged to the Open Space Trust Fund. When I read the ordinance and I read the referendum, I thought maybe, yeah, you could use it for debt service.
Right.
But I wasn't sure if you could or couldn't. I couldn't give 100% that you could or couldn't. But in the past, it was used, and I brought it to the township attorney's attention if you can give it an opinion letter. Right. So, when you hear that this hasn't been brought to the public, hasn't been open, it's been posted since February 14th. We've done everything possible we can to correct this problem. So I don't want you to think that we're trying to, like you're saying, trying to, do something. No, we're trying to correct the problem. I saw the problem from 1999 on to 2008, 9, and 10, and 11, and I didn't want to continue that if we couldn't do it.
I'm respectful of that. I just wish that we could all get together and communicate a lot more easily rather than have plans put together and then have them presented, because to be very honest, the young lady, myself included, felt very left out, okay, and I have very strong views on it, as if you didn't know.
Well, I know, and we've talked about that,
Yes.
but you can't say the township hasn't done the due diligence. December 15th, February 2nd, February 7th, February 14th, we've had meetings on this, and we had a session with the Board of Education, and unanimously, they said, let's take the next step, which is the easement, the 51% easement, and that's the whole concept of it, of a conservation easement. And you and I have talked about it, and I respect you very much. We've always had. We don't have to agree, and that's why I like when you come up, because I know at least you're not going to slam me. But the fact of the matter is that's how this whole thing started. And the fact of the matter is, I do want to get it right. If we can't use it for bond service, I don't want to use it for bond service. But I feel, I think that it's an advantage to the township. But that being said, you and I can always agree to disagree.
Without question, I respect the approach. I would love to talk to you at another time when we're not under this kind of pressure.
Thank you, Mr. Howell.
Thank you. Have a good night.
It was always the intent of both referendums. In fact, the state statute, it was always the intent to bond. I mean, if you buy a piece of property, open space property for $4 million, we're going to lay down cash for that out of the current fund and increase the taxes by $4 million? I mean, it was always the intent to bond for open space projects. Always. It just wasn't written properly by one of our attorneys after the referendum. But it was always our intention. We have to do it that way.
My name is Bob Venezia. I live at 102 Brooklawn Drive. When I first found out that the open space tax tripled after the 2003 home revaluation, my initial reaction was that the state would never have created a law allowing this to happen. So I decided to do some research on open space laws. During my research, I came across NJSA 40:12-15.7D, which seemed to clearly indicate that voter approval is required to change the amount or the rate of the annual space levy. I was further convinced when I found out that many towns did in fact automatically lower their open space rate when they performed a home revaluation. And the Mount Olive referendum is an example of that, and I have a copy of that if anybody wants to see it. The latest piece of evidence indicating that the 2003 open space increase violated another section of the state statutes came in Mr. Inglesino's 17-page memo to Mayor Barbario dated February the 14th, 2012. On page 6 of that memo, Mr. Inglesino writes, and I quote, 15.8 does not permit municipalities to increase the open space tax levy because voter approval is required to increase the levy beyond that which voters had previously authorized, end quote. Mr. Inglesino, in your legal opinion, did Parsippany violate state open space statutes when it allowed the open space tax to triple in 2003 as a result of the home revaluation?
Keep going, please.
And is the town still in non-compliance with these statutes today? And this is a question for the council. What are you going to do to get us back into compliance with state law, and when are you going to do it? Thank you.
Well, the question is one that we haven't looked at, and we'll look into it. I haven't had any reason to research the 2003 revaluation or the impact that it had on the Open Space Trust Fund, but it's certainly something that we can take a look at. I'm just not
You still have
conversant with
time
facts.
if you want to.
I'm just, when it gets back to me, I'm curious to hear about it, because
Okay.
I think we are violating the law as we speak.
Thank you.
Mr. Inglesino, just for your information, the reval is based on a percentage of the assessed value of a home. It's a percentage.
That's correct.
So when the houses were evaluated, we had the revaluation, and the value of the homes went up. The percentage didn't change. We did not change the percentage. The dollar amount went up, but the percentage didn't change.
Right. Mr. Venezia is referencing the part of the statute that says the amount or rate. So he's referencing the part of the statute that says either or. We just haven't had any reason to look at that issue until you raised it. We'll certainly look at it.
I'll talk about it. It's been done at the county level. When you lower the amount that's collected, you're lowering taxes for people. So I'm open to talking about it.
I want a handout before I...
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Parsippany-Troy, 182 Hawkins Avenue. I just handed to the town council a letter that I sent to the Attorney General the other day, and my statements from this evening. Please look those over in your spare time. Just to reiterate something that was being said here tonight, is that we are adding wording, we are adding things to our levy, the annual levies that we have out there. And it says if we are adding or removing purposes under 15.7D, that can go before the public as a referendum. And as far as recreation being included, I understand everything you're saying, Mr. Inglesino. However, my point to you is I wasn't here in '88 to vote on that ordinance. So when I read that ordinance now, it does not say passive recreation. And that's what I'm looking at, the ordinance. There have been a lot of things wrong with our ordinances. Things are in there that should not be, and things that should be are not. That alone, to me, says, hey, we need the people to get on board here. And yes, the people have a right to vote on whether to bond and debt services. I don't care whether you've been doing it all this time. And we may get screwed as far as having to pay back the money. But we, the voters, that's a big right of ours right there to say whether or not we want you bonding out for such things. And that's the biggest thing my complaint has been, $4.5 million on one project. That's a lot of money. Okay? But you have to take the entire community and listen. We voted in '88. There was a thing in 2006, and I'll tell you, I was here in 2006, and recreation was one of the things nobody wanted. Comments from John Cesaro and Ann Grassi, where they questioned. They didn't want this going to certain things for recreation. There's comments out there. There were people against these. Okay. Mr. Cesaro commented that the open space to him is not tantamount to putting into bathrooms at a roller rink. He stated we should explore the option of a one-time only per household, per business card, whatever. But you did not want to see
Give
that.
some of the money back, you're saying.
And Dan Grassi did not feel comfortable changing the purpose and the intent of our open space trust fund. Okay? These are comments that are in your packages. Now, how can you say that that's what we did? No. In '97, there was no mention about the state statute. In 2006, when we did that referendum, I was here. I've been here for 8 years. You guys know that. That referendum had nothing to do with anything except to split the levy out. It did not do anything else. It did not pick up bonding. It did not do anything. If our ordinances are wrong since day one, the people have a right to vote and get a new ordinance that they find acceptable to them, and they have a right to vote on how their tax money is being spent. That is the biggest concern. You have the trust of your community, and I don't give that easily. I would like to be able to say that I can walk around here I can walk out of here feeling better tonight, and I do thank you for tabling that, because I do think that's a good thing at this time. But what I would like to say is to anybody that has any questions or anything, my phone is always available. I am always available. I have been to these town council meetings. I am for this community. I have always been watching the community money, the taxpayers' money. And I feel that if you do this and just do it without a referendum, you are slapping the community in the face. Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you to Pat for that one, because I've been around a long time, and you know, when ordinances came before this town council, you read them in the paper and you knew what it was about, and you knew on first reading when it was available. It wasn't done in name only, important ones. It was done and you had access to the information so you could absorb it and make reasonable decisions personally, and you, the council. Tonight, no. Since February the 14th, I've never seen an ordinance change so rapidly. And I question, in the state statutes, 40, 12, 15, 7, when you have A1 and you come to C, it says maintenance of lands acquired for recreation and conservation purposes. And then go down to F, where it says payment of debt services on indebtedness issued or incurred by municipalities for any purpose set forth in subparagraphs A, B, D, E, and G of this paragraph is allowed. I imagine that's what it means. C is eliminated. And why is that? I'd like to know the answer to that. Is it because you're not allowed to indebt those services? It's questionable. Then, when you go down to C, again in the same state statutes, separate accounts may be created within the municipality trust fund for the deposit of revenues to be expanded for each of the purposes specified in the proposition approved by the voters of the municipality. And we did approve propositions. They were the referendums. The first one approved the money to be spent 2 cents for the acquisition. The second one, which did have a lot of concerns from this council and from members of the community, but we were told it was in the best interest of the community, so we supported it, most of us did. But then the division went into 3 categories. Never once was there any mention of debt services or bonding. If you read the ANJAC information that I sent you, there were municipality referendums that specifically dealt with bonding and indebted services. It was part of the question, which was never asked of the voters of Parsippany, and therefore my assumption was that we were not bonding or using debt services. So I thank you for listening, and I thank you for tabling and thinking maybe. I know there's a lot of inexperience on this council right now, but you should not rush into things the way you did on the changing of this ordinance.
I just have one question. What happens to the Open Space Committee? It's disbanded, right, because it's not in the ordinance?
No, it's not disbanded. It repeals those provisions of the ordinance that are inconsistent with the new ordinance,
But it isn't in the new ordinance at all.
which means it stays.
Okay. But it won't ever be enumerated in that ordinance, right?
No.
Okay.
I'm Bob Crawford, 35 Hidden Glen Drive. I'd like to go back a year. Get out tonight and go back a year. And a question for the mayor, question or two for the mayor. Mr. Mayor, who approached you with regard to recommendations around the high school fields, the fences around the fields, the tracks and the lights? Who approached you and what recommendations were originally made to you?
About the...
Sorry?
Yes,
No, I'd like to...
What's the date you're looking for?
Well, let's go back to April when you first conversations...
2011?
Yes, yes.
Well, I looked at some of the fields. I looked at the...
No, sorry.
I looked at the fields. I looked at the tracks and the fences, and we've had discussions about... I'm sorry about that, Lee. We had discussions about them.
I see. Well, did Mr. Peterwitz approach you with recommendations with regard to the high school fields, with regard to the fences, with regard to the lights?
Well, they made recommendations in our meetings that we discussed that we needed to be done, and we decided in some of those meetings, you know what? If we're going to do this project, let's do it right.
All right, so let's be very clear then. So Mr. Peterwitz came to you and said, Mr. Mayor, it is his belief or his organization's belief that we need 2 turf fields. It is his recommendation that we need to put new fences up around the fields. It's his recommendation that we need to build 2 8-lane tracks, and it was his recommendation that we needed to build lights at the hills and repair the lights at the high. Were those his recommendations?
I don't think it was his
Whose recommendations were those?
But we discussed that, and we went in there, my agreement that I would, if I was to do this project,
Yes.
anything, the fence and within it, the township would do.
But who made those? Did
Well,
Mr.
that's
Peterwitz?
April 2011.
Okay,
I can't
fine.
quite remember who made it.
Fine. So in the Oprah documents,
No. Yeah, and if
Mr. Mayor.
it was that, he made the
Okay,
recommendations?
it's very clear that he
That's
made the
fine.
recommendations.
That's
He came
fine,
to you.
Bob.
Okay, good. I just want to get clear. Now,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, once those recommendations were made to you, and before you began to state your approval, what exactly did you do? What due diligence did you follow? What studies did you undertake? What experts did you bring in to, excuse me, let me finish, please. Did you
Oh, if you're going to yell at me, I'm not going to let you
I'm not yelling at you. This is how I
spin your
speak.
hand at me. I'm not going to let it
I'm
be
doing
doing
what?
that way.
What am I doing now?
If you want to do it, fine. Do it.
Excuse me, what am I?
Spin your hand at me like.
Spin my hand? No, wait a minute. I couldn't laugh last time. Now I can't spin
Let's
my
go.
hand?
Come on, Bob.
No, Mr. Barbario.
I'm going to let you finish. Go
I'm
ahead.
trying to
I'm gonna
finish,
answer
but
the
I will
question.
spin my hand because this is the way I speak.
Okay.
Now let me finish, Mr. Barbario, without the interruption, please. What did you do specifically with regard to conducting a due diligence and analysis, bringing in people who were experts in the various areas before you declared your support and engaged the attorney, spending tax dollars to make this happen? I'm just trying to understand your process.
I'm going to give you my
Wait, Bob, I want you to finish. We're not going to go back and forth.
All right,
You're going to,
that's
you
fair.
have
Fine, thank you
2:30.
very much. I appreciate it. I am.
Keep going.
No, I was just like a simple question. Well, let me finish.
Okay.
I'm getting very
I don't
concerned here.
want- Let him finish.
Before I go.
I just want you to finish before we start going back and forth.
Mr. Council President, you are now spinning your hands at me. I just want to go on record.
I'm short, you can't say it. No.
So let me clarify and finalize, if I may. It is clear now that the input with regard to the Field of Dreams, with regard to turfing the two fields, with regard to 8-lane tracks, with regard to putting in the new fences, and with regard to putting in lights at the hills and repairing the lights at the high, all came from Mr. Petowitz. Okay, we got that established. Now, my question to you is, because remember, all of this is documented in the files that we got via Oprah, so we know precisely when indeed you began to demonstrate your support for it. I want to understand what you did, due diligence-wise, to analyze these various proposals.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to let you give you the answer first and foremost. We did meet. I spoke to the township Parks and Forestry gentleman. We went down there. I asked them to get quotes from our township engineer that does our parks for us, and the quotes came back, as you know, $4.5 million. The fact of the matter is that we would not, let me repeat, we would not be in the situation we are in with the high school football fields if you did your due diligence back in 2008 to 2009, 2009 to 2011, and 2009-10, 2010 to 2011, when you were the chairman of Buildings and Grounds, you did nothing, Bob. And that's what this is always going to go back to. You didn't know no due diligence. You knew the fields were in bad shape, and you did nothing. So that's why we're here we are today. There's my answer for you.
So you won't answer me, you'll just accuse
Yeah, I'm answering the fact that you didn't do your due diligence.
Mr. Barbario.
That's it, Bob. Yeah, I'm done. I'm done talking. You're
You
done.
got
I'm
9,
not-
all right, 9 seconds.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barbario,
9 seconds.
what
Go.
did you do?
I just told you what I did.
No, you told me what I didn't do. What
Right,
did you
okay,
do?
time's up.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Exactly. I told you what you didn't do, and you continue didn't do it. So that's why the schools are in the situation they're in. Yes, you were the chairman of the Buildings and Ground. You should have did something
Okay.
then.
Next person, please. No,
Art, you have 2 minutes.
you don't have to keep your hands
I could
behind
do it
your
in 2
back,
minutes.
trust me.
Arthur Hendrickson, 65 Leamore Drive. Last week, I mentioned it. I'm bringing it up again. The mayor just hit on it. I hate, like the dickens, to see money that could be used for very, very constructive purposes in this town be used to bail out the Board of Education for their lack of judicious use of the money we gave them. Okay? Those fields were not maintained. And I don't see why open space money should be used to maintain the fields. The Board of Education's got plenty of money. They give unconscionable raises, 4%, 4%, 4%, compounded. They give a raise to the superintendent that's above the state guidelines, which incurs lawyers' fees, additional money that has to be spent. I don't think that this is the way to use this money. Change the topic a little bit. We have a representative form of government. It did not work out the way we started this country, where our open town meetings and everybody got up and spoke and talked. It got unwieldy.
So now we elect representatives to do our bidding. And it seems to me, as I look at this group tonight, that the group, nor the public here, really knows what the total public bidding is. There's sharp divisions. Yes, no, we should, we shouldn't. I think this is the time that I would strongly support a referendum where the people get out, all the people get out, not just a few of us that are here, but all the people get out and vote. Now, sir, you did not indicate that you couldn't have a referendum. You indicated that it might not have any legal status. Is that correct?
I said that
Essentially?
referendum is not a requirement.
Okay. But you're not prohibited.
You can do a referendum legally on whatever you want. It doesn't mean that it's binding or that it has any legal significance.
It does not have to be binding, but it certainly would show the group the total population feeling on the subject. Thank you.
Thanks, Art.
Ray Vigano, 16 Whitewood Drive. I have to say that I'm a bit confused. I've been hearing that Parsippany is in pretty dire financial straits. We're concerned about tax increases. We're concerned about not having enough money to do a lot of critical services, to provide critical services. And yet, I hear that there's $4.5 or $5 million in an open space fund. I'd like to ask a question and get an answer. I've also heard that there's something like $5 or $6 million in a utility surplus account. Seven. I'd like to know what that money is intended to be used for. And if it is a surplus, as I understand a surplus, if that money can be returned to the utility payers of the town as credits or a refund. $6 million or $7 million is a substantial amount of money. The other thing we've been debating here and listening to is the use of open space monies for acquiring high school fields. It's been mentioned. I've been there. I mentioned it last week. The fields need some work. They're not nearly in as bad a shape as some people have contended. At the last week's meeting, I think Mayor Barbario agreed that perhaps you don't need 8 lanes, that the 6 lanes that are currently there can be used adequately if you hold additional heats. As I pointed out, is typically done at all kinds of track meets. The use of the trust, the open space money for the high school fields, if that were to happen, would those high school football fields be used just for football for non-high school activities, or would they be open to other activities? Is there something other than the refurbishing of the football fields, for example, soccer fields, lacrosse fields? Is there something that we don't know about? The aspect of putting lights, the Hills doesn't have lights. The High has lights. They may be not the best lights. I would question, talking about fiscal responsibility and what I call cost effectiveness. The cost of putting lights, it's nice. It's a nice to have. How many night football games will there be? Even the use, if it were to pass, by the recreation groups, how much night activity would there be? And does it justify spending that amount of money for the lights? Just as I pointed out, does it justify spending the money to add lanes on tracks which I feel are not needed? I had mentioned that the Board of Education has a surplus. Just as we are learning, there are surpluses tucked here and there throughout this town. That the Board of Education should dedicate some money to refurbish the fields. They're not in that bad a shape. Fence doesn't cost that much money to replace. The stands, as I saw them, were fine. If you tell me that you want to have a program where you're going to have a state tournament and you need 5,000 additional seats, that's another story. Okay? The bottom line is, what's the utility money going to be used for? And I think it's a misguided effort to go through this gyration of whether or not we can justify using the open space money for these football fields, which really should be dedicated and left to the high school as football fields. We have open space in this town. There's an article here. 24 acres, Edwards Road, New Road, redevelopment. Okay? You guys don't want to talk whether it's going to be apartments, whether it's going to be condos. You have money in an open space fund. Here it is. Okay? You're quoted as stopping this gentleman from speaking about 110 units. Okay? If you want to spend open space monies, there's land there that obviously someone has not been able to sell because it's partially a marsh. I don't think if you asked 100 people or 1,000 people in this town, you'd get 999 people that would say, we do not need more condominiums, we do not need more garden apartments. There's an opportunity to spend open space money on open space. Preserve it. Part of it is a marsh. There are migratory birds that use it. That's what the money is really intended for. If it needs to be cleaned up and redeveloped, do it. And use it as a park, even if it's just a hiking part, a park. The fact that there's a plant nearby in Route 280 certainly doesn't make it the most desirable for development for residential purposes,
Okay, time's up. Finish your
but it
sentence,
can
please.
be kept as open space, which is one of the intents of the money that we approved for you to spend.
And the intent is also for recreation as well.
I understand.
But Mr. Vigano, I'm going to respond to some of the questions that you did ask. When you talk about hard economic times, and I've said this last week as well to you and to the members of the public, that in these hard economic times, as you know, we go through, the New Jersey League of Municipalities wants us to go to classes on how to consolidate within the community, consolidate with the Board of Education. This is one of the best practice initiatives that they give points to the townships that if you do consolidate services with the school boards in the township, we get points for that, which means we're not going to lose state aid in the end because we have to come out with a certain amount of points. This has all been encouraged by the state government for us to consolidate. It's funny now that if we were to do this project and raise taxes, we'd be in the same situation today. We found a way where we use the open space trust money, like I said, because you said $4.5 million, which that probably won't be, because that's conservative. You take the 2 tracks out, that's $500,000 less, so the 4.3 goes to 3.8. Who knows where it's going to end up at $3 million? But you use that debt service to pay off the bond, which means it's not going to raise any new taxes. Yes, the schools, something needs to be done, and you agreed tonight that those fields, something has to be maintained. There's no doubt about it. I went and I looked at those fields. I'm not a civil engineer like you, but I can tell you I played on those fields as a kid in 1979, and they haven't changed. That field has not changed. That's Parsippany Hills High School. When I went to Parsippany High School, the track is dilapidated. I can tell you that, in my belief, that something has to be done. If this doesn't go through, it doesn't go through, because there's 2 bodies here. You have the council, you have the school board. Now, we met the school board and myself on do we move forward? Because I said to the school board, I'm not going to move forward on this unless you're on board. Well, I moved forward on it, so you can figure the rest out. Okay, the fact of the matter is this, that we're trying to find ways to share services within our community. And when we do that, when we finally share services with our community, this is what happens. And instead of talking about the issues, what happened last week was very discouraging. And you were here last week. Who's attacking who? These pet projects, because it's not a pet project. This is something that, in the end, I believe can bring the community together. We're trying to find ways for curfews. We're trying to find ways for the traffic, which we're going to do. I've met with those that were against the project. I don't know what more we can do on the township side. We have been open. You're here tonight. But the fact of the matter is this. We find a way to do it. And this is to me, it's a great way to do a project in town, not raise taxes. Like you said, the economy is bad. Times are tough. Okay, we find a way to do it. And then, of course, now, those in favor of not using open space trust money for it. And this is the great dialogue. In a democracy, the cornerstone of democracy to me is you have this type of disagreement. And we can disagree. But the fact of the matter is, when you start to see what's transpiring, it's like there's nothing wrong with having a dialogue. When you're getting yelled at, that's not right. And I don't even like yelling back. I'll be totally honest with you.
Do you feel I yelled at you?
No, you didn't yell at me, Mr. Vigano. If you did, no, I've been yelled at by a lot harder. But my point is this. This is just my opinion, and this is how I feel. The fact of the matter is, I think we found a way to do projects, which, I got to tell you, when I go down to the League of Municipalities and we meet, they encourage towns to share services to no extent. In fact, they want to pass a bill that if we don't share services, we're going to lose state aid. So now I'm hearing from the public, oh, we don't want to share services with the Board of Education. Okay, if you lose state aid, because we didn't do that, and this is a bill that one of the senators wants to pass, if we don't share services. And you can't always share services. I'll be the first to tell you. It doesn't always work out. And this might not even work out in the end.
Can I respond to you?
Just real quick.
Real
quick.
I'm sorry?
Real quick. Time.
I would suggest that you share services on maintenance. If you want to use the trust fund monies, use it to help the Board of Education maintain and upgrade the fields. You do not have to have these other expenditures to accommodate the recreational activities. I asked a few questions about the surplus in the utility funds. I'd like an answer.
Well, I'm considering using that a certain portion to bring down the tax levy into the general fund. And then I haven't even discussed yet with the administrator what we're going to do. We have the balance, and we're looking into lowering the rate.
Fantastic.
So,
thank you very
And just
much.
Just to answer your one question on the fields, it's going to be used for multi-purpose. You're going to have soccer. You're going to have field hockey. You're probably going to have baseball.
On the football field?
On the football field. It's going to be a multi-purpose field, yes.
If I may say this, from March
Band.
from March of 2010 to March of 2011, if I'm wrong, the high schools have used our fields within 78 days 100 times because they can't use the fields. They're using our fields. They're wear and tearing our fields. I mean, and eventually we're going to have to repair, maintain our own fields, but this is exactly what's been happening. I have the whole list on what they're using. They're using Veterans Memorial. They're using Janneron Park. And every single day they use our fields. So and thank God we opened up to them, because if we would have closed all the fields to the high school where they can use fields, they would have nowhere to practice, nowhere to play, nowhere to do anything. But since we opened up our fields to them, and thank God we do, now they have somewhere to go because their fields are that bad. Because once it rains, they can't use the field.
This is the football.
This is baseball uses our fields, football. So they don't use our
All
fields
of
for
them.
practice.
I was told that the football players at Parsippany Hills do not practice on their own field.
I wouldn't practice.
Can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise I get in trouble.
Sorry.
Dan, you know what? I'll talk to you later. I apologize.
I wouldn't practice if they were goose hopping on the field either. There are ways to keep the geese off the field.
Thank you.
My name is Mike Petowitz. I live at 480 Park Road here in Parsippany. I first want to start by thanking Mr. Cicero. At the last council meeting in the public session, I thank you for setting the record straight on statements in the press and statements elsewhere here and in other public meetings that challenge my integrity and challenge my character, and I thank you very much for sharing your personal opinion in our friendship at that meeting. I'd also like to thank Mr. Carifi, Mr. Cicero, Mr. Stanton, and Mr. Ferrara for pledging their support for the Field of Dreams project, not only as a project, but also for the proposed financing that is under review. It's been very clear to me, particularly after reading Mr. Inglesino's long opinion, that this town has been a trendsetter. In 1988, this town approved open space before it was a state statute, if I understand
Well, it was
correctly.
pursuant to the state statute, but it was certainly one of
the first
if not the
municipalities
first.
in the area. And the use of these funds have been multifold. We've acquired property that we've developed. We've acquired property that we've laid into open space. We've done some wonderful things that we've seen at this meeting with historic preservation. We've done good things with the money. We've also built active recreation facilities that everybody in this town has access to. There's no question about the integrity and the intent of this council, current and past. It was to provide opportunities in this town to preserve, to improve, and to make this township a better place for our kids and for our adults. There have been many people well before me. I'm not going to stand here and take credit for a concept. There have been people such as George Schreiner. There have been many, Mr. Albahani. There have been people who went before the Board of Education multiple times with proposals on how to dramatically improve our high school fields. The problem with those proposals was the lack of a dedicated funding stream. There have been many people who have turned a blind eye, and that's okay. But that blind eye over the many years has resulted in the conditions of our field. And I'm going to go through some of them. Our fences are well beyond rusted. They're dangerous. Our fields are used 9 to 12 times a year. That means marching band, cheerleaders, field hockey, boys and girls soccer, softball, baseball. I'm just talking about high school now. I'm also talking about gym classes, guys. Those grass fields are never used. They can't be. There's no ability to develop a root system. There have been many attempts to try to resod, to try to change the grade, to try to change the drainage. There have been many good people who have tried, but they have failed because of the basic structure of those fields. For anyone to sit here and to say, hopefully you've been to look at them, but if you're here to say that those fields are adequate, that those fields are standard, please look again. Go look at fields at Dover, at Boonton, at Morristown. We can go on and on and on, where those towns, both the town councils and the Board of Eds, have recognized a problem, have gathered their shared common interest and resources, and have done a fantastic job to improve a community asset, not only for the high school, but for those kids. Our kids, I'm president of Little Vikings football. When we go to Boonton, our kids are impressed. When we go to Dover, those kids are impressed. They're playing on the high school fields that blow our high school fields away. Let's not mince words about the needs of our fields. Let's recognize the problem. We can disagree on the solution, and that's fine. Let's stop the name calling. Let's rally behind what there is a need to do and try to find a vision and a way to do it. That is all the Parsippany Fields of Dreams is intended to do. It's 1,200 people who have signed a petition. I'm almost done? Thank you. Thank you. It's 1,200 people who have signed the petition. It is a group of mobilized individuals who are saying to this council, to the Board of Ed, and to the public, we cannot stand this anymore. We need to take action. Let's find a solution, and please, let's get it done. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Rob Monroe. Wait, one second. Okay. Hi, I'm Rob Monroe, and I live at 16 Dartford Road. Before I start, I just want to say, I just want to speak my mind. Okay. This is my first year on town track team, and I practice long distance running at Parsippany Hills High School. When I'm on the track, I notice many things that can be improved by the Field of Dreams project. The grass portion of the field is in really bad condition, and the track can use upgrading as well. I am also a little Viking and will be playing for the varsity level in the fall. When my brother and I were little, we couldn't wait to be old enough to play Vikings football on the field at the Hills. My brother is now a sophomore, and he loves it. I'm in 7th grade at Brooklawn, and I am looking forward to the day when I can play at the Hills too. I feel the Field of Dreams project is I feel if the Field of Dreams project is approved, it would bring something to my family as well as all the other students and their families who go to PHHS and Parsippany High. Pride. Please approve the Field of Dreams project. Thank you.
Excuse me, young man. How fast is your mile? Nice. Takes me about 20 minutes.
Give or take.
Give or take.
Rick McNulty, 5 St. John's. 2 things. I'm going to start, and I don't want to question yet because I don't want it to pull into my time. It's about the, I forget the exact section, Section 3B for Township Code 51-7.
Council. The word "the funds," it seems to be causing a lot of confusion. There's been a lot of questions. And if you go on and read it, it says that the funds, and you're not clarifying where those are, may be used for any of the purposes set forth in subsection 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 7. And with the new one, the way it's read, and again, this may not be the intention, but if you have now time to redraft it, can you just clarify that not all the funds may be used for any of the purposes in subsection 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 7? Because at a sense, the way it's read is that if you took the acquisition portion of the not less than 1%, you can use it for whatever the other, development of lands acquired for recreational and conservation purposes. Because that number, 2, is listed as any of the purposes. Okay, so kind of a question, not really, but that's where I was going with it. The second part, and I am talking to the council here, it kind of refers to a word used by council, is past practices. And I want to know what the past practices have been for parks and forestry. Over the years, over the many times, today was a beautiful day. I'm not sure if any of you had time, or even this past weekend, to get out to the parks. Do you know they're all closed? All the parks are closed.
Yeah, that's something I was going to bring up after the open session.
Okay. I mean, I'll just go on a little bit more. I mean, today's a great day, and I don't understand why from November to April, every park is closed except for activities or events that have been issued permits. I called the rec department, the number listed on this closed sign, because I wanted a permit to push my daughter on the swings. We have to pass this big sign that says park closed. Daddy, can we go to the park? No, the parks are closed. But then you see all these other families out there using the parks and everything else like that. And I have to thank Jasmine Lynn. You must have given me 45 minutes on the phone, and I really appreciate your time. And it said, due to hazardous conditions. What happens on April 1st if these hazardous conditions disappear? And she stated that we have liability insurance for all 12 months. It's not like it goes away on November 1st. And I can understand that some days there's snow out there, and there may be different conditions. I just don't understand why you have to close the parks, because that's what the sign says. Anyone that says know what closed means says it's closed. That's it. And then, I guess, clarify, am I trespassing if I go on there with this sign that says parks are closed? And I guess I might go back to you, Council.
In regards to your first question, I probably would not advise making the change that you request, because B refers to the ways in which the funds can be used, and of course A has already provided the apportionment. So I don't think that's a necessary change in my judgment. Mr. Cicero's a good lawyer, and I'll certainly review this with him and take his input on it. In terms of the parks, I did have a conversation with Councilman DePiero about it before, and we'll certainly look into the issue of liability. But my knee-jerk reaction to it, my instinct is that really not much of a liability issue. You have the protections of Title 59. I'm not sure I quite understand what the concern might be in terms of liability, but it's an issue that we'll look into.
I'll give my opinion on it now, too, since you brought it up. Thank you.
I don't think Council President closed the public portion yet.
Oh, no, he's
I'm
answering
responding to her question.
Oh, I'm
he's
sorry.
good, he's
Oh,
good.
I'm sorry.
He's waiting for the park question.
Sorry, Mr.
I just
DePiero.
found out about that last night with this sign with the parks. We spent a lot of money years ago, Mayor Prairie and I, building 14 parks in this town, buying land and building parks. The objective was so that every child in town could get to a park without mommy and daddy driving them. That was the purpose. We built them all over in local neighborhoods. When I heard about this, this is contrary to what we want to do. Now, as I understand it, okay, someone slipped on ice a couple of years ago and is suing the town because we didn't maintain the property during the winter. And that's the cause for this now, all right? But there's a better way to handle this. I don't want to see these parks ever close. You know, I've gone to swim clubs or to beaches where they say, lifeguard not on duty, swim at your own risk, okay? Why can't we, or caution, ice may be thin, you know? ice skate at your own risk kind of a thing? Why can't we just have a sign and say, parks are not maintained from November to April, use at your own risk, as opposed to closing them? I don't want to see our parks closed. So this is my recommendation to the administration and to our township attorney to look into and say, put up a different sign and keep the parks open.
No, I agree. Just have to go with hours, hours up, during certain times.
The hours are in order,
Okay.
but the parks closed is not anywhere in the town.
You're right, and there are days where, like today, it was 70 degrees. You'd easily be in the park all day.
Everyone's in the park. I don't understand. It's Tuesday. Nice. I'm stuck in the office.
I didn't say it was that.
Seeing nobody else come further, I'd like to close the public session. Consent agenda. All items listed with an asterisk are considered to be routine, non-controversial by the Township Council, be approved by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda, considered its normal sequence on the agenda.
Second.
Hold on. Do we take this off or no?
That was done already. That was
Okay.
already done.
That was our tinker.
Motion by myself, second by Mr. DiPiero. Roll call.
Mr. Carriffy?
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro?
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero?
Yes.
Mr. Farrar?
Yes.
Council President Stamp?
Council President, before we go to the next item, can I just bring up one other item?
Yes, you may.
To our administration. Our sewer treatment plant should be in the final throes of completion. The projected date was sometime in April.
April 25th, my 20th anniversary.
Okay, now, my question is, are we going to have some kind of a ribbon cutting? That's a milestone in proving that. Are we
We
going to
will.
have a ceremony?
Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to let you go swimming, too.
I don't want to drink the purified water, but that's...
You want your souvenir shovel, Mr. DePiero?
Ordinances for introduction. Mr. DiPiero, 2012:11.
Okay, ordinance 2012:11, an ordinance amending section 285-4, Schedule A, no parking, fire zones of Article 1 of Chapter 285, parking of the Code of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills, to establish fire zones and regulate parking at 22 Sylvan Way, Block 202, Lot 1.14. Be it resolved that the above ordinance be introduced, read by title, and passed on first reading at a meeting of the Township Council, the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills, held on March 20, 2012, and that said ordinance be further considered for second reading and final passage at a meeting to be held on April 10th, 2012, at 7:30 p.m. prevailing time, or as soon thereafter as the matter may be reached at the municipal building in said township, at which time all persons interested shall be given an opportunity to be heard concerning said ordinance. Be it further resolved that the clerk be authorized and directed to advertise said ordinance, with the notice of introduction thereof being published in the official newspaper according to law.
I'll second that, but Jasmine, I have a question on the ordinance of the Township Council of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills. I'm going to vote for the introduction, and then at another time I'll have some question on that, okay?
On this?
On the health.
No, we're
No,
on
we're
11.
on a total separate thing right now. No, we're,
reading ordinance for introduction.
yes. Oh, that's what you're talking about now? Okay, okay.
2012:11?
Some questions on the fees.
Oh.
So that could be right now.
We're on 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but it's okay.
Motion by Mr. DiPiero, second by Mr. Farrar. Roll call.
Mr. Carriffy?
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro?
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero?
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara?
Yes.
Council President Stamp?
Yes. Ordinance number 2012:12. Mr. Farrar.
Okay. Resolution of the Township Council of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills supporting the filing of the application for the Morris County Historic Preservation Trust Fund. Whereas the Craftsman Farm Foundation engaged Holt Morgan Russell Architects to develop construction documents for a fire suppression system in the log house and annex.
You're doing the
And
wrong
which one am I doing?
one.
Which one?
12.
Why not
Reading the resolution.
We're going to be starting.
Sorry, I'm starting over. My time is up. Ordinance number 2012:12. An ordinance amending section 285-4, Schedule 8 no parking fire zone of Article 1 of the Chapter 285 Parking of the Code of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills to establish fire zones and regulate parking at 78 Fanny Road, Block 448, Lot 23. Be it resolved that the above ordinance be introduced, read by title, and passed on first reading at the meeting of the Township Council of the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills, held on March 20th, 2012, and that said ordinance be further considered for second reading and final passage at the meeting to be held on April 10th, 2012, at 7:30 p.m. Prevailing time or as soon thereafter, as the matter may be reached at the municipal building in said township, at which time all persons interested shall be given an opportunity to be heard concerning said ordinance. Be it further resolved that the clerk be authorized and directed to advertise said ordinance with the notice of introduction thereof being published in the official newspaper according to law.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ferrara, second by Mr. Cicero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes. Ordinance number 2012:13. Be resolved that the above ordinance be introduced, read by title, passed on first reading at an immediate meeting, Township Council on Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, held March 20th, 2012. Said ordinance be further considered for second reading, final passage, meeting to be held April 10th, 2012, 7:30 p.m. Prevailing time. Soon thereafter, as a matter be reached at municipal building said township, which time all persons interested shall be given the opportunity to be heard concerning said ordinance. Ordinance to establish an hourly wage ranges for blue-collar supervisor employees at the Township Parsippany-Troy Hills. Be it further resolved, clerk be authorized, directed to advertise said ordinance, notice with introduction thereof being published in the official newspaper according to law.
Second.
Motion by myself, second by Mr. DiPiero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Yes.
Council President Stanton.
Yes. Ordinance number 2012:14. Mr. Cicero.
Thank you, sir. March 20, 2012, ordinance number 2012:14. Be it resolved that the above ordinance be introduced, read by title, and passed on first reading at a meeting of the Township Council, Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, held on March 20th, 2012, and that said ordinance be further considered for second reading and final passage at a meeting to be held on April 10th, 2012, at 7:30 p.m. Prevailing time or as soon thereafter this matter may be reached at the municipal building in said township, at which time all persons interested shall be given an opportunity to be heard concerning said ordinance. An ordinance of the Township Council of the Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, County of Morris, State of New Jersey, to amend and supplement various sections of the Code of Township Parsippany-Troy Hills dealing with fees governed by the Health Department. Be it further resolved that the clerk be authorized and directed to advertise said ordinance with the notice of introduction thereof being published in the official newspaper according to law.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Cicero, second by Mr. DiPiero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro.
Yes for now, pending answers to Mr. Councilman Ferrara's questions.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Yes.
Mr. Council President Stanton.
Yes. First add-on, Mr. DiPiero, please.
Is that the place to place?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'll make a motion to add two items
Thank you.
to our agenda.
Second.
I was going to read the titles first, so we know what we're adding on.
You said
One is,
make a motion to add two add-ons.
One is a place-to-place transfer, and one is a Stark Preservation Trust Fund. Now, Mr. Cicero seconds.
Second.
Motion by Mr. DiPiero, second by Mr. Cicero. Roll call.
Okay. Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cicero.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrara.
Abstain.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Abstain on one.
Well, you can say yes to add them on.
Okay, Ed, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Abstain on all in one?
On the liquor license.
He's okay, all right, okay. Yes, okay. Mr. DiPiero said yes.
Yes.
Okay, and Council President Stanton?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. DiPiero.
Okay, resolution, whereas an application has been filed for a person-to-person, place-to-place transfer of plenary retail consumption license number 1429-33-001-007, thereto issued to Domenico, Inc. for premises located at 352 Route 46, Parsippany, New Jersey. And whereas the submitted application form is complete in all respects, and transfer fees have been paid and the license has been properly renewed for the current license term, and whereas the applicant is qualified to be licensed according to all standards established by Title 33 of the New Jersey statutes, regulations promulgated thereunder, as well as pertinent local ordinances and conditions consistent with Title 33, and whereas the applicant has disclosed and the issuing authority reviewed the source of all funds used in the purchase of the license and the licensed business and all additional financing obtained in connection with the licensed business. Now therefore be it resolved that the Township of Parsippany-Troy Hills Council does hereby approve effective March 20th, 2012, the person-to-person, place-to-place transfer of the aforesaid plenary retail consumption number 1429-33-001-007 to Tower Hospitality License LLC, trading as AMIA number 1429-33-001-008.
Second.
Motion by Mr. DiPiero, second by Mr. Cicero. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Abstain.
Okay, got it. Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
And Council President Stan.
Yes. Mr. Cicero, second now.
Thank you. March 20th, 2012, resolution, Township Council, Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, supporting the filing of an application for the Morris County Historic Preservation Trust Fund, whereas the Craftsman Farms Foundation engaged Holt Morgan Russell Architects to develop construction documents for a fire suppression system in the log house and annex, and whereas these documents have been approved by the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office, and whereas the Craftsman Farms Foundation has prepared a grant application to the Morris County Historic Preservation Trust Fund for implementation of the plans for the fire suppression system, now therefore be it resolved by the Township Council of Township Parsippany-Troy Hills, County of Morris, State of New Jersey as follows. 1, that the Township Council supports the application to the Morris County Historic Preservation Trust Fund for funding for the construction of the fire prevention and suppression system, and 2, that the mayor and the township clerk are hereby authorized to sign the owner assurances form of the grant application.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Cicero, second by Mr. Karifi. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Mr. Cesaro.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
And Council President Stan.
Yes.
I make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Cicero, second by Mr. Farrar. Roll call.
Mr. Karifi.
Yes.
Cesaro.
Yes.
Mr. DiPiero.
Yes.
Mr. Farrar.
Yes.
Council President Stan.
Yes.
Have a
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
1, 2, 1, 2. Oh. There's no one more deserving than Barbara.
Feel better.
Oh, hey, Mr. Venezia.
Good morning.
To the residents of